Any questions so far? Now, because we're in a learning institution, I should start with something like really intelligent. And I'm a numbers person. You're going to get that as we go through today, that I really enjoy numbers. I love statistics. So I heard a statistic this morning when I was driving in here, and I thought I'd share it with you. They say that, actually take a look to your left, at the person to your left, and then take a look at the person to your right. They say that 1 in 3 people are really good looking. So if it wasn't the person to your left or your right, then it's got to be you, right? Now, can you remember a time when you were little? Maybe it was the first time it snowed and you ran outside and you want to catch a snowflake on your tongue, or first time you drove a bicycle and you look behind, your mom or dad weren't there. That feeling of camaraderie we had as children when we would go out and play. I grew up in a little town on the East Coast, and my mother had a rule. You could do whatever you wanted all day long, but when the street lights came on, it was time to come home. But what happened to people when they went to work? Why is it when we show up for work, we don't have the same level of passion and camaraderie and excitement that we had as children? Why do we look forward to the streetlights coming on at the end of the day because it's time to go home? When I first started my career as a professional speaker, I used to do a lot of executive coaching, and we're going to talk a lot about age today. So I'm 54 years old. I'll be 55 years old next month. So I'm almost 55, I guess, if you were to say that. So when I would do my executive coaching, it was mostly people around my age, mostly executives, and I get this common theme from them. They would say, Eddie, boy, I work hard all week. Around Friday afternoon at 4:30, I stop by the liquor store, I pick up half a dozen bottles of red wine, drink all weekend long to forget about it, only to get up Monday morning have to do the whole thing all over again. There's got to be more to it than that. And there's a group of people that go to work every day and they love it. They can't wait to get there, they're excited, they get upset when the streetlights come on because it's time to go home. Not because they don't want to go home, but because they love their job so much. That's the group I want to talk about today. I want to talk about those people that are engaged, and I want to give you some tools that can help you become more engaged at work as well. We're going to talk a lot about numbers. I do a lot of research, like a ton of research. I read about 50 pages a day on the things that I talk about. I can go toe-to-toe with just about anyone when it comes to the impact of the aging demographics. But if I spend the next 90 minutes talking about numbers, you're probably going to look like this. And I don't want to put you to sleep on a Friday afternoon, but I do want to share with you, some of the things that are kind of relevant to you right now. So let me just go back here. So some of the things we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about trends that are going to impact you, trends that are going to impact you as employees and supervisors, and they'll impact you as mums and dads and brothers and sisters. We're going to talk about numbers, but I'll frame it up in a way that I think you're going to find kind of interesting. We'll talk about engagement in the workplace, the impact of the aging population, how do we work with 5 generations in the workforce, and then we'll leave you with some kind of inspirational messages as well. So before we start, let me just kind of talk a little bit about engagement and what it is. And if we look at engagement, we kind of have to look at the evolution of leadership, and that kind of changed as generations came along. So if you were to go back to the turn of the century, this is what your boss looked like. And he probably was a man, because at the turn of the century, there was very few women in the workforce. Before 1935, there was very few women that actually worked. These would have been more the mature generation. He was probably a tyrant. It's why we formed unions. We formed unions so that you would make it home at the end of the day and you'd have all your toes and fingers and your rights would have been protected. And then we kind of evolved away from that and we went into more of a selling style of leadership, and that was led more by the baby boomer population. And that was when we would have, instead of one person telling everyone what to do, we would have groups of people would get together and they would come up with ideas and they would sell those ideas to people. And a lot of you in this room would have gone through that. Through the 90s, you would have went away on sessions where you banged on drums and you built little bridges with paper clips and string. And a big word was accountability. But the problem with this group of people, they didn't always do what was in the best interest of the employees. So sometimes we actually even put them in jail, like WorldCon and Enron. Heck, we even put Martha Stewart in prison for a little while. So it was in the right direction, but it isn't where we needed to go. And then we got to this topic called engagement. And what engagement means is inclusion and co-creation, and that was really led by the X and Y generation. So we're going to talk a lot about the generations and their characteristics, but this generation and this method of leadership was more about everyone gets involved, that it's not one person making a decision or a group of people, that everyone in the room gets involved. But it goes deeper than that. In your particular case, it would go to your students, it would go to the community, it would go to the people that supply the school itself. So, and we look for something magical. And what we look for is what's called discretionary effort. And discretionary effort doesn't mean that you're going to be plugged in 24 hours a day and you're going to take your technology home with you. Discretionary effort means that when you're present, when you're in the room, what you're doing makes a difference. And that you align your individual strengths with what you're trying to achieve in your organization. Now let me share with you some numbers, because I love numbers. And it wouldn't be right if I didn't share some numbers. So right now we know that 59% of the workforce are not engaged. 59%. Imagine 59% of people that come to work every day are actually not engaged. 27% are engaged. They're the ones that can't wait to go to work. They get upset when the street lights come on at the end of the day. They're the ones that they're the best employees. 14% are what we call actively disengaged. So these actively disengaged employees are employees that quit a long time ago, but they still show up every Monday morning for work. But let's dig a little deeper into those numbers on what they mean. So that first group, that 27% of employees, the absolute best people, they do 60% of the work. So 27% of the employees do 60% of the work. Now think about that. If we go to the next group, that 59%, the unengaged employees, they also do 60% productivity. Now I didn't realize that was wrong. For the longest time I would put that slide up, and about a year ago I was speaking to about 250 accountants, and they all started whispering when I put this second bullet up, and I'm looking at it thinking, did I spell something wrong? Because it wouldn't, if anyone knows me, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to spell something wrong. And finally somebody puts their hand up and they go, Eddie, you can't have 120% productivity. But basically you have to kind of follow me here. So what I'm telling you is when your employees are unengaged, it takes twice as many employees to do the same amount of work as when they are engaged. But if we go one step further, the actively disengaged, they actually do negative 20% productivity. Those are the people that tear your organization down as the rest of you are trying to build it up. But let's go a little bit deeper into those numbers and kind of see what they really mean. So if we look at it from a payroll perspective, this group here, the best of you in the room, we get 90 cents in the dollar. So today's payday, so we get 90 cents in the dollar for the payday. That's wonderful because you're very productive and you're very valuable. It means you might take a sick day. You might spend a little bit of time on social media, a little bit of time at work doing items that are not work-related. This next group here, we actually get 70 cents in the dollar. So a little bit more time off, a little bit more social media, a little less work-related activities. But this next group, you get 50 cents in the dollar. So they take every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement. They come in late, they go home early, they use gossip to undermine the success in an organization. You know what's funny? Some of you looked at each other and you smiled. And the reason you did is you put a name on that person. You said, oh my goodness, that's Judy or that's Jim, because every organization has some of these people within their workforce. So what we always want to do is how do we get more motivated? How do we get more people on the other side of the spectrum? So I get this question a lot from people. They'll say, Eddie, well, why isn't the way we did things forever not working anymore? And one of the reasons why things aren't working anymore, everything has changed. We have a lot of strife happening in the world. We have 5 generations. We have multicultural. We have 2 genders. Everything is different now. And it takes a different skill to be successful in the workforce. So what are some of the things that are going to really, really impact you as we go forward? And the big one is this, not the wine drinkers. The aging population. The aging population is going to have a huge impact, both positive and negative, on every single one of us in the room. So let me kind of walk through. This was the world we all grew up in. It was the perfect world. We had a growing population. We'd be able to bring junior staff members into an organization. We could promote them, and finally they would become senior, either technical resources or teachers or nurses or doctors, and then they would retire. And there was always lots more coming back in. This is the world we live in now. We don't have near as many people entering the workforce. We're still okay. Even when I look at this room, the bottom of the baby boomers and the X generation. But we're starting to see a lot of the baby boomers head off into their well-deserved retirement. I mean, think about it. If you look at this, I mean, it's beautiful. It's got nice shading. It looks like a pyramid. This looks like a coffin. So that's the kind of world that we live in now. So let me talk about the aging population. But I think to really talk about the aging population, what you really have to do is kind of walk through the baby boomers on how they came into the scene and where they are right now. So if we go back to the 1950s, the 1960s, that's when baby boomers first started. And that's when we first noticed the impact. We would have had to build thousands of schools and pediatric wards and manufacturing facilities for baby clothing and baby formula. And it's when we first realized, oh my goodness, this group is a big, big group of people. And then in the 1960s and 1970s, something interesting happened. Baby boomers started to find their way in the world. So I'm going to do a little scientific study here. If you were born on or before 1964, stand up, if you can. Because we are talking to baby boomers, right? And I want you to stay standing if you can. So you're all the baby boomers in the room. Now I have a simple question. If when you were growing up, when you were little, if you were the only child in your house, you had no siblings, you can sit down. Now see, every one of you that are standing, which is virtually every one of you that stood up, represent a family larger than we currently produce in the United States. We currently have a birth rate of 1.86, so per one female, or 1.86 per. So, but let's work with this a little bit longer. So if you're one of two, you can sit down. If you are one of three, you could sit down. If you're one of four, you could sit down. Now here's where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. If you were walking down the road today and you saw somebody pushing a stroller with 5 or 6 kids hanging off the stroller, you're thinking one of two things. That's either a daycare center or those people are crazy, right? So if you're one of 5, you can sit down. One of 6. So I'm just curious, way up in the back, well, how many in your family? 11. And yours? 10? 7? 7? 7 and? Awesome, okay, you guys can sit down. Oh, did I miss one? How many was in yours? 7, okay. So you got to wonder, well, why is that even relevant? Now, I got to tell you, I've been doing this a long time. I'll tell you what's really interesting. I've been speaking on generations since 2005. In 2005, when I would ask the baby boomers to stand up, the whole room stood up. And I saw 50 Shades of Grey looking back at me. Like it was so different than now. In fact, I spoke at my first conference last year, and it was a group of managers, about 100 people in the room, and I wanted the baby boomers to stand up, not a single baby boomer in the room. Now, there's some of you in the room that are Y generation. How many in the room are in the 20s? In the 20s? See, you guys were not even invited to these sessions in previous years. So, you know, my audience has changed a lot. So why is it relevant when we look at the size of the family? Well, the largest family I've ever encountered was a family. A gentleman lived in a little community in Alberta, Canada, and he had 17 kids in his family. Now, 17 kids, I asked him, I said, I just got to ask you, like, what was it growing up with 17 kids in the family? Like, you know, did you have a big house? He goes, oh, no. He said, we had a small house, small farmhouse. He said, I said, well, how did you sleep 17 kids? He said, we slept them by length. He said, not by age, by length. He said, long ones slept up and down in the bed, and some short ones slept across the bottom. And I said, I'm just curious, when did you move out of the house? He said, I moved out at 16 years old. I said, what about the rest of your siblings? And he said, we all moved out probably before the age of 17. He said, if you were at home and in the house at age 17, he said, Mom and Dad were looking at you like something wrong with that one. Like, why is that one not leaving? Like, you know, they should be leaving now. It's 17 years old. Aren't they going to find their way in the world? Now, I don't know if you saw this, but last year on Dr. Oz, they had a person on the show that had 17 children. And he diagnosed that person with a mental disorder that she was addicted to having children. Now, I grew up in the East Coast. If you had 17 kids, you were just considered a good Catholic family. Like, it wasn't considered to be a bad thing at all. So why is it relevant? Well, I went home after I was talking to this person, and I looked at my daughter, 23 years old, absolutely beautiful young lady, and I said, Sasha, I said, I'm just kind of curious, when are you leaving? She said, what do you mean, Dad? And I said, when do you plan on moving out? She goes, I never thought about it. You never thought about it? She said, well, Dad, you bought me a car. You pay for the insurance. You put gas in the car for me. Mom does the laundry. I own every piece of electronics known to man. When I'm downtown at a bar and I'm running low on cash, you take your iPhone out, put money in my bank account. Why would I leave? And I'm thinking, when do kids leave? Like, is there a statistic on this? So I'm a numbers person, so I went on and did research. How many of you have kids living at home with you right now? See, you're part of the problem. But so I did some research on this. If you have a Y generation or Z generation living with you, how many of you are Y generation and are living at home? Okay. So if you have a Y generation or Z generation living with you at home, up until 2008, they were going to stay with you until they're 28 years old. 28 years old. Now, I'm supposed to be an inspirational speaker, and I know I'm probably depressing some of you right now. So why is that relevant? It's relevant because life expectancy of a Y generation in the workplace right now is less than 18 months. Baby boomers went to work and might have changed their careers 3 times in their whole life. My dad went to work at Sears when he was 15 years old, retired when he was 55. A lot of you in the room would have had parents that went to work for certain organizations and stayed there their whole lives. But we have a generation now that turn themselves relatively quick. Now, I don't want to really depress you, so I actually went out and researched the numbers just to see if it was any different. So the most recent data is if you have a Y generation, Z generation living with you now, they're actually going to stay with you now until they're 33 years old. So your chance of having a young, empty nesting house might be a little bit of a challenge. So in 1970s, 1980s, baby boomers started finding their way in the world. They started getting married. For a lot of baby boomers, it was their first marriage. They started getting supervisory positions. In 1980s and 1990s, baby boomers started spending money like drunken sailors. And they started doing well for themselves, and they drove interest rates up high. And what nobody thought about was what was happening behind them, and that was the X generation. And the X generation is the first negative growth generation we have ever seen in the Western world. And the reason is we discovered a birth control pill. So we went from these very large families to now much smaller families, and we had a very competitive baby boom population that were out in the workforce. And then in the 1990s, the 2000s, baby boomers really started to find their way in the world. And interesting, one of the things that the baby boomers did was that they bought big homes. And they bought big homes with no storage in them, which is really quite odd. That we would build these big homes, we have no storage in them. And we bought all kinds of stuff, trailers, Harley Davidsons, things that we can't store in these houses. So because of that, one of the fastest growing industries in the US right now is the storage business. And it's a $43 billion a year growth business. And it's for people who can't store the stuff that they bought in their homes, and they're storing it in these storage units. What interesting side market that came off of this is a whole series of television shows. Storage Wars, Texas, American Pickers, like there's all kinds of different shows about, I mean, how could you forget where you put your grandmother? Where's Nan's urn? I don't know. And the Harleys, where did we put the Harleys? I have no idea. And then, but what we weren't thinking about, again, was what was happening behind, and that was the X generation. Then we're starting to see a little bit of a growth generation after that, and that would be the Y and Z generation. Now we start getting pretty close to where we are right now. We get around that 2010 area, and I put the cruise there because my mom and dad, when Dad always said when he retired he wanted to go on a cruise. How many people have gone on a cruise? Wow, a lot of you have gone on a cruise. Interesting, different parts of Canada and the U.S. that you travel to. You get in the middle of the continent, people don't do cruises. You get closer to the coast, people do. we did a cruise with my parents. They were nervous to go on a big ship, so we did a cruise with my parents in December, and a couple of years ago in December. Probably the wrong time to cruise. December, a cruise ship is kind of like a floating senior citizens complex. You know, everywhere we went, we were tripping over walkers and canes, and my wife and I loved to, get out and socialize with people. I grew up playing the guitar and singing, and you couldn't find a bar that was open past 8 o'clock. Like, it was just, but and the funny thing is, and any of you that cruise, you might have noticed is, the higher in the ship you go, the more likely the bar is open and that there are people. Like, for some reason, I don't know, that height in bars, it seemed to work good. But so we go to this one bar, and there's this couple, and I would put them probably from New Jersey by their accent. They were just the sweetest couple. She had a glass of wine in front of her, and her husband, I assume it was her husband anyway, was sitting across from her, and she said, I just got to tell you, I just love you so much. I don't know how I could have made it through all these years without you. And he looked at her, and he was kind of a little snarky, and he goes, I just got to ask you. He said, is that you talking to the red wine? She looked at him, she said, that was actually me talking to the red wine. So, so what nobody was thinking about was what was happening behind. There's nobody coming behind us. So why is it relevant? Well, right now it's still not that big of a deal because we still have lots of baby boomers in the workforce. We have a generation coming in behind. But if we go out to around 2020, this is where the number gets startling. If we go to about 2020, the population between the ages of 55 and 64 will increase by over 70%, and the population above the age of 65 will increase by 53%, and they're the people that are going to leave. Now, why is that so relevant? Well, it's relevant because there will not be enough people in the workforce to be able to support that aging population. And at the turn of the century, when we had that tyrant as our manager, people did not plan to retire, they planned to die. At the turn of the century, life expectancy was 48, retirement age was 65. Using the same logic today, with life expectancy to be well in the 80s, retirement age should be somewhere around 93. So we have this population that's going to head off into the well-deserved retirement, and we are going to be challenged to be able to support that population, especially with health care and those types of things as they start to head off into the well-deserved retirement. So what does it mean for everyone in this room? I believe there are unbelievable opportunities right now. And I believe if you're a young person in the workforce, you will see opportunities that your parents have never seen. We will look at, I don't think there's a baby boomer in the room who hasn't been bullied in the workforce, and I don't think there's a baby boomer in the room that somebody didn't look at you sometime in your career and say, look, if you don't like your job, there are 10 people waiting for it. But your children will go to their bosses in the future and they'll say, if you don't treat me better, there are 5 jobs waiting for me. So we'll see a big trend as more and more of the baby boomers start to head off. The big competition in the future is going to be for human resources. So everybody in this room, you always ask kind of 3 key questions, and where you are in your life will dictate on how you answer those questions. And those 3 key questions are whether we join an organization, whether we stay, or whether we leave, or whether we become engaged or unengaged. So here are the 3 key questions that every one of you asks when you come to work. The first question is, why is this job important to me? And for many of you in the room, it might be vocation, it could be location, you want to live here, you might be just starting your career and you're paying off student loans, or you want to get married, or you're saving for a vacation, and some people it's giving back. Like everyone, when we join our job, there's a different reason why the job is important to us. The second thing every one of us will ask is, who am I going to be working with? What are my fellow employees going to be like? Are they going to be nice? What's my boss going to be like? What age group are they going to be? And the next question every one of us asks when we walk in the door is, what do you want me to do? What activities do I do every day when I go to work? Now here's how we answer those questions. The first question, why is this job important to me? That's why we join. We join for the paycheck, the benefits, the location, the vocation. All of those things are the reasons why we join. And depending on where you are in your life, those reasons are completely different. The second question, who am I going to be working with? That's actually why we stay. We stay if we like the people around us. And we'll stay if we like the people around us, even if we don't like our managers. You ever heard that where they would say people don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses? Statistically, it's actually not correct. It is one of the reasons why people leave. But the biggest reason why they stay is if they like each other. And we'll even see people stay if they don't like their boss, but they like the people that are around them. Like, for example, we call it the classroom effect, where people might like each other, not like the teacher. So you might come to work, love your fellow employees, or maybe you're in the nursing or doctor, or you're in the education field and you love your students or your patients, but you don't like the bureaucracy. So we tend to stay if we like the people around us. The number one reason why people become unengaged at work or leave right now is if they don't like what they're doing. And what's really different about this, this wasn't the reason 5 years ago. But as the population gets younger and younger, we need to be doing more things that we enjoy doing. We need to have more of a sense of purpose. Now, there's all kinds of examples of this. I want to share with you one. Anyone here on the technology side? So in technology, there's kind of two sectors. There's application development and application support, right? So application development is the cool stuff. It's the new stuff. It's the networks. And application support is more supporting technology. I had a friend of mine that was opening a facility on the East Coast, and he needed 450 employees. So he goes out and he does these job postings in the area, and they were able to get about 150 employees, and they needed more than 150, so they started to advertise across Canada. Every once in a while, there should be aha moments in a session like this. Anyone here on the hiring side? Anyone here do any of the hiring? So this could be your aha moment. Every once in a while, when you're interviewing someone, they lie. I don't know if you knew that. Well, so anyway, my friend is going out and he's doing these interviews, and he starts to look at people across the country and why they should move to the East Coast. So it was a smaller community, a great place to raise your children. It was on the East Coast. It was beautiful. So they started getting more and more people, but they were very clear that it was an application support job. So after the people got there, and they were there for a very short period of time, they started to leave. So Cecil, who's my friend, Cecil said, Eddie, we had to do exit interviews to find out why people were leaving. And he said, as we started to do exit interviews, we would ask the questions, like, do you not like it? Oh, no, I love it here. The paycheck? Oh, paycheck's good. Benefit? Oh, wonderful benefits. You like the people? Love the people that I'm working with. Then why are you leaving? Well, it's application support. I don't like application support. It's icky. So what they would do is they would come to get the jobs. Once they got the jobs, they would use those jobs to be able to find jobs in that community that they enjoy doing. So we always have to look and where you are on your life, because my same friend Cecil retired a couple years ago, and I'm driving down the road, and Cecil's mowing the grass with no shirt on a Wednesday afternoon. So I'm looking at him thinking, Cecil's kind of old, I didn't realize that he was, that he had aged that much. And so he sees me, and he waves me over, and he goes, Eddie, he said, come on out, have a rum and Coke with me. He said, I want to talk to you. And I said, Cecil, it's Wednesday afternoon, I'm working. And he said, well, I need to talk to you. So I said, all right, I'll go sit with you. So we went out on his back deck, and he said to me, I'm that guy. I said, what guy's that, Cecil? He said, I'm the old guy with no shirt on, mowing the grass on a Wednesday afternoon. He said, I don't want to be that guy. He said, I was the vice president of a large organization last week. He said, no, I'm that guy with no shirt on. And I said, well, Cecil, I said, what do you want to do? He goes, I want to go back to work. And I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, I want to teach. And I said, okay. And he said, look, I got to tell you. He said, Eddie, I'm done with the VP stuff. He said, I've done that my whole career. He said, always driving numbers. He said, but my daughter just called me and said she wants to get married in the Dominican Republic. He said, that's going to cost us around $20,000. My other daughter called and said she wants to go back to school. He said, that's going to cost me around $25,000. He said, I just want to stop the bleeding. He said, if I can just kind of break even when I go to work and do something I love to do, he said, then I would be happy. But you see, Cecil's at a different place than you would be. You would be at a place in your life where work is for a different reason. But what we have to realize now with 5 generations in the workplace, every single person in this room is motivated differently by each one of these 3 things. Why is this job important to me? Who am I going to be working with, and what am I going to be doing? And the younger the workforce, the what am I going to be doing becomes more important. So there's 3 things that we need to do to be able to engage people more in the workforce. And the first thing is we got to get to know the people that we work with. And when we talk about getting to know people, there's kind of three things we look at in getting to know people. The first thing is that we get to know people based on their gender. So if we look at, men versus women in the workforce, as I said earlier, until about 1935, there were virtually no women in the workforce. In fact, if you go back to 2000 or the 1970s, you go back to the 1970s. Now, the baby boomers in the room, most of you will remember the 1970s. Some of you are too stoned, can't remember all of the 1970s. But if you go back to the 1970s, over 50% of the workforce were what were called traditional homes. And that's where the husband went to work and the wife stayed at home. And I actually grew up in a house like that. I remember coming home from school, and the first thing I would say when I opened the door was, "Mom!" And she'd say, "I'm in the living room, I'm in the kitchen." And my mother didn't go to work till I was 14 years old. And it was very, very common. So fast forward till just the late 2000s, and over 60% of households have the women as either one of a dual income family or a single income family. So a huge difference in a very short period of time. So the first thing we have to realize when we work together is that we have values and communication styles that are completely different based on gender. The second thing we have to realize when we go to work is that we have another set of values based on culture. Now, the interesting thing, with a birth rate of 1.86, all of the growth in the future has to come from immigration. With a declining population, and in many countries now in the Western world, we've hit a tipping point where all of the future jobs will be filled by people who currently don't live in the country. So as we see more and more baby boomers head off into their retirement, if we want to be able to get a hip replaced or a cup of coffee or go to Walmart and shop, and we want people to be able to deliver those services, we have to look at it through immigration. And the interesting thing with this, it creates another set of dynamics in the workplace, and that's a cultural difference. But the one I want to spend time on today is age, because this is fun, it's interesting, and it is a huge challenge right now in the workplace. It's how do we all get along when we're so different in our demographics and our age? And, for the longest time, I talked about 4 generations in the workforce, but now we have 5 generations in the workforce. And everything that's happening right now is the first. We've never experienced the workforce like it is right now. So there are if we kind of go through the generations, mature 1909 to 1945. Any matures in the room? Any matures? One? You look marvelous. Baby boomers 1946 to 64. Nice and proud. Lots of baby boomers. That's actually really nice to see. Generation X, 1965 to 78. See, I suspect there would have been a lot of X. Generation Y, 79 to 94. Awesome. That's, I got to tell you, you guys, I wouldn't even have seen you a few years back. Generation Z, after 1994, any Zers in the room? Any? One. Just one? Who invited? Oh, two. All right, so let me go through the generations. But here's the way I want you to think about this. Don't think about the generation that you are. Think about the generation that you're not. And think about, that's why that person is like that. And how do I get along better with the generations that I'm not? Because I got to tell you, if you're 55 years old and you're having a conversation with someone who's 21, you may as well go outside and talk to a squirrel. And it's not because the 21-year-old is a squirrel. It's because they speak a completely different language, and we have to learn what that language is. And the same holds true when you're 21 years old and you're talking to someone that's 55 years old. You have to learn their language. But for a lot of you in the room, you have to think about this more than one way. It's how do I get along with my fellow employees, but also how do I get along with my students? And the older you get, in your teaching careers and your administration careers, the more difficult it is to communicate with a younger generation. Now, here's the other thing you're going to realize when you go through this. Not all of you are going to fit into the generation that you are. I'm a baby boomer, 1962, so I'd be at the kind of bottom of the baby boomers. I actually will identify more with the X generation in the room. So some of you that are on the cusp, or you might have grown up in a rural area and you're younger, but you have an old soul and you act more like a baby boomer. What really matters is that if you and I work together, that I would learn what's unique about you. That I would learn it based on your gender, your culture, and your age, and I would take the time to ask. And the reason why we say you have to get to know people, a few years ago, I remember, and it was actually in a setting very similar to this. I had a lady that I had coached, and she was the vice president of a large university. And she called me one day and she said, Eddie, I'm in trouble. She said, we just had 360s done on the managers. And she said, and at this particular university, every 5 years they did 360s. And if you scored poorly, you almost had to reapply for your job again. And she said, I didn't do well. And she said, I need some coaching. And I said, sure, we can set something up a couple weeks out. She goes, no, I need coaching tonight. So I said, all right, let's go to Starbucks. So we go to Starbucks, we sit down, and I said, how did you score poorly? And she said, they said I didn't know my staff. I said, well, how many staff do you report into you? And she says, about 450 employees report into me. And I kind of gave that look, and she goes, but through 5 direct reports. I said, okay. I said, how often you get out and talk to the 450, not your direct reports, the 450? And she goes, never, really, no, I can't, no, I don't think I do much at all. And I said, why not? And she said, well, 2 reasons. One is I was taught not to. I was taught it undermines a hierarchy in our organization that I should go through my direct reports. And she said, the other is, I don't think they like me. and I don't know what I would say to them. And I said, well, start by saying hello. Just one sec, I write this down, hello. And then what? So how long you been here? What do you do? What do you have as challenges? So we write down about 8 different things for her to say. And a couple weeks later, we got together. She said, Eddie, she said, it's going really well. She said, do you have any more questions I could ask them? She said, because after I get to 8 questions, I have this awkward silence, and I don't know what to say. But, over time, she got, it really started to come together for her. She still has her career as vice president of the university. We've done other programs with them. We've done excellence programs with their students. But it really is getting out and talking to people. And that's the only way you're going to know the people that you work with or the people that are around you is to get out and ask them questions. So let's walk through the generations. Now, mature generation, we only have one of the mature generation in the room. The mature generation is a generation that understands duty and sacrifice better than anyone else on the planet. And the reason they do that is because they either grew up during the Great Depression or World War, or they were children of people who grew up during the Great Depression or the World War, and they absolutely know what it's like to be without. In fact, a few years ago, when Lou Dobbs used to still be on CNN, 2008, remember we took that economic downturn, Lou Dobbs was on CNN, he would always say, worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Talk to anyone who lived through the Great Depression, and they will tell you 2008 was nothing like the Great Depression. I mean, they literally lost their children to camps to be fed. There was no social programs to be able to support people. There was no fallback plan. I remember talking to my grandfather, and some of you might have known this. I would talk to my grandfather, and he would say, Eddie, I used to drive to work on a bicycle. And he said, because we couldn't put gas in the car because all the gas went to the war efforts. And he said, after a while, he said, the tubes wore out in the bike. I tried to repair them so many times, and all the rubber went to the war efforts. He said, we used to put grass in the tires, and that's how I would drive to work. I would drive to work on a bicycle with grass in the tires. If your kids are putting grass in their tires right now, they're smuggling it somewhere. It's not. And I remember going, and some of you may remember that, I remember going to my grandmother's house, and she had a ball of string about this big in the kitchen when you go in, because they would buy fresh meat, and it would be wrapped in brown paper and tied in string, and they would save that string, save the tin foil from one time to the next. They were the absolute real green generation. They were the ones that really knew how to recycle things. But because they grew up in such scarcity and lack, they have spent their whole life avoiding scarcity and lack. And because of that, they are fantastic savers. They pay off their credit cards. They're hard workers. In the workplace right now, they like flex time. And they like flex time now, but during the day when they were at work, they would have worked any hours that you would wanted them to work. My parents would spend their winters in Florida, and when you go to Florida, if you've ever been there in the winter, a lot of the folks that work in the Florida area in the winter are seniors. And I remember when I went with my mother one day to the drugstore, and we were getting some stuff, and we're in a lineup, and there's a big lineup, and there's a lady at the front, and she's on the cash register. She's looking over her glasses, and she's just as slow as coal molasses, just ringing through. And so finally, somebody announces on the PA system, "Mabel, would you please come to the front and open your till?" Nothing, no Mabel. A little while later, "Mabel, please come to the front and open your till." After a little while, another voice came over the PA system and said, "Mabel's in the bathroom. Give her a break, would you?" So in the workforce now, they need more flex time. But they might want to spend the winters, in Arizona or Florida, and then spend the winters working or the summers working. But in their day, they were great workers, very, very loyal. I mean, if your granddad was a Ford man, he's a Ford man till the day he dies. They're going to put a Ford logo on the front of his coffin when they bury him. Like, there's that kind of loyalty. Went to the same barber, shopped at the same place their whole lives. The thing is, right now, there's not many in the workforce, but they still have tremendous power. They sit in the Senate, they sit on the boards for many organizations, they set policies and guidelines, they still control a tremendous amount of wealth. Now, next one I want to talk about is, and then one thing to remember about the matures is they're motivated by pain. They've spent their whole life trying to avoid pain, and they were motivated by pain, and many of them were bullied in the workforce. This is me as a little boy. I grew up pretty much dirt poor. For those of you in the room, you will remember you were a baby boomer by certain characteristics that you would have grown up in. Like, if you could think back, if you could remember the first day you were born, and you were heading home in the car, can you remember how you got home? Or any of you that were younger and you had little brothers and sisters that were coming home in the car, anyone remember what that was like? You were probably cuddled up in a little white blanket with blue lines on it in your mother's arm in the front seat with a metal dash and no seatbelts. That's probably the way you went home. I know that's the way I went home. And I know my mom and dad loved me because Dad would roll the windows down when he smoked. So, now, some of you will remember when you were young, when you would watch TV, you would have to get up, and if you wanted to change the channel, you had to actually walk up to the television and lean forward and turn the channel. And then all of a sudden, sometimes, the knob would come off in your hand. And when the knob came off in your hand, for many of you, you went out into the garage and you came back with what? Pliers to be able to turn the channel. So you finally turned the channel, and you realize the reception's really poor, so there was these telescopic things in the back. You would turn them all different ways, and you would go to the kitchen, and you would get a roll of tin foil. And if you said tin foil, you're a baby boomer, because it hasn't been called that for years and years, right? And you would wrap them up or stick a fork in the end of them, and you would get some kind of reception. So let me walk through the baby boomers, because the baby boomers still have the most power in the workforce and the most power as consumers, and they will until they're dead, especially as consumers, because they are a huge, huge generation. So lots of times people will talk about it's got a mind of its own. So lots of times people will talk about younger people as the me generation or the entitled ones. The fact of the matter is, baby boomers are the entitled ones. They're the me generation. They believe the world rotated around them. So there are some really interesting characteristics about the baby boomers. You could literally, I'm a little ADHD, so every once in a while I lose that clicker. If I happen to forget where it is, somebody point to it. You could literally watch the baby boomers grow up if you watched Oprah. And Oprah catered to the baby boomers her whole career. So when Oprah first started, baby boomers were a psychological mess as a generation. In fact, the number one prescribed drug to baby boomers was Prozac. And there's only one drug that will probably surpass it. Anyone have any idea what drug that is? Yeah, it is Viagra. So we are a generation that we're always looking for something that would make us happy, right? So when we were younger, we had all these psychological issues as a generation. Oprah brought in an expert to help. Can anyone remember who that was? Brought in Dr. Phil. And when our issues became such a big deal, Dr. Phil got his own one-hour show under the Oprah organization. Now, over time, Dr. Phil has changed. Now he really caters more to our grandchildren of the baby boom generation. And the baby boomers, actually, we all got our heads on straight. We got off the Prozac, and we became fantastic managers and leaders and coaches of the local hockey teams and basketball teams and great contributors. And all of a sudden, something else happened to the baby boomers. Their health started to fail. And Oprah brought someone else in. Remember who that was? Brought Dr. Oz in. Brought Dr. Oz in, and Dr. Oz spent time, and he got his own show. So he still caters predominantly to the baby boomers. So if you watch the Dr. I got to tell you, I watch Dr. Oz, and I can identify with it. You know, I see things like, oh my goodness, I have that. Oh, my wife has that. Oh, my cousin Billy has that. But I remember, now I have the most amazing job in the world. You know, I travel a lot. I get to go to all kinds of really nice places, and lots of times I might be like delivering a keynote in the night, so I'm sitting in a hotel, maybe I'm out by the airport, and I'll just flip around the channel. So I have watched my share of Oprah and Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz for the day. And one day I'm watching Oprah, prime time, watching Oprah, and she's spending almost the whole show talking about the color of your poop. And I'm like, no, they can't be doing that on prime time. Like, no, that's not right. Well, in fact, not only was it right, it was one of her most popular shows. It was so popular, pardon the pun, they had to do a rerun on it. And interestingly enough, when Oprah retired and they had this big celebration in the Chicago Center, Dr. Oz got up and sang a song about the color of your poop. Now, I know that sounds really odd, especially for those of you in the room that are younger, but I will attest to this, and anyone in the room can probably have experienced something very similar. Lots of times I might be speaking somewhere, and I'm sitting at a table, and I'm at the head table, and there's all these different, kind of age groups around, and I'm waiting for my turn to get up and talk, and there might be some baby boomers sitting around the table with me. If I'm sitting with a baby boomer, it is not uncommon that over a beautiful meal, that they're talking about some disgusting thing that's happening in the part of their body like I really care. But that's the way the baby boomers are. We really believe that everyone around us thinks that what's happening in our life is important. Now here's where it does get important. When you're not a baby boomer, you have to learn to respect the things that are important to baby boomers. And that's what I always say to generations. You have to learn what's important to people that are not the generation that you are. So baby boomers are all about putting hours in. Every generation has their addiction. The matures, it was cigarette smoking and work. Baby boomers, they are addicted to work. And it's a dangerous addiction. It's no different. I mean, it's not a baby boomer out there. There's lots of, they'll go home at the end of the week and say, oh my goodness, I put 65 hours in this week. I haven't seen my wife in a month. She's divorcing me. The kids they don't speak to me anymore. My health is failing, but I spend 65 hours at work because that was important to the baby boomers. Now, if you're not a baby boomer, you can do a little test. Now, how many people, X and Y generation in the room, are not even wearing a watch? How many are not even wearing a watch? See? Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, oh, I use my cell phone. But time isn't as important to you as the baby. I mean, baby boomers, we give them a watch when they retire. That's how important time is to them. It's my dad retired, he would get upset when the paper boy was late. He said, you should have been here at 10. It's like 10:30, where's the paper boy? So you can do a little test, a little survey on your own. You can do this tomorrow morning. When you come to work, if you're not a baby boomer, this is what it normally looks like in a work environment. Say you had to be here at 8:30 in the morning. Chances are the baby boomers are here at 7:45, maybe 8 o'clock. But those of you that are X or Y generation in the room, some of you didn't get in until 8:45. Now, I know that you all have reasons for it. The next generation is one of the hardest working generations out there, and you're caring for children and parents in many cases, so you have this scenario where you're what we call a sandwich generation. So you might have taken work home with you, and you dropped your kids off at the daycare center, and on the way in this morning, you got here at about 8:45. Make a note the next time you walk in 15 minutes late at the baby boomers in the room when you walk in. They don't have to be your boss. They just have to be in the room. When you walk in 15 minutes late, they're going to go, that's kind of weird. I thought we started at 8:30 around here. It's because time's really important to them. So when you show up 15 minutes late, they almost see it as a sign of disrespect. So when we have meetings set up with baby boomers, I would always tell this to my sales teams and organizations. If you got a time set up to meet someone, you got to show up on time. But I got to tell you, a few years ago, my son was moving, and I thought I'd go help him. So that year at Christmas, I bought him a new watch. So I'm packing the stuff in his bedroom, and I noticed a watch on top of the bureau. And it looked like it had never been worn. In fact, the tag was still hanging off of the watch. So I thought, like, is it like the hat? Do they wear them with the tags on them? Because can't always keep up on all of the things, you know. So I went out to him. I said, Jay, I noticed the watch I bought you. Looks like you've never worn it. I said, do you not like it? No, Dad, I love the watch. It's beautiful. I said, have you worn it? No, Dad, no, I haven't. I said, why not, Jay? He said, it's embarrassing. I said, it's embarrassing to wear a watch? No, Dad, it's not embarrassing to wear a watch. I don't know how to tell the time on it. I said, you don't know how to tell the time on the watch I bought you? He goes, no, with the hands? He said, I don't. I said, I know I would have learned it, but he said, I don't know how to. I'm thinking, I really failed as a father. My 22-year-old son can't tell the time on a watch. So I'm thinking, there's got to be some more to this. So about a week later, I'm actually speaking at a large university to a group of business folks. And when I went there, they asked if I could do a speech in that afternoon to a group of grade 8 students. So I got to tell you, I don't get nervous in front of an audience. Like, you know, I speak to CEOs and senior executives all the time, and I'm very, very comfortable. But boy, when these grade 8 students come in, I was scared to death. I never seen an audience that was so mean looking. They were like sitting there like, man, whatever you're selling, I'm not interested in it at all. Like, but I did ask the question. I said, I'm just curious of everyone in the room, how many people don't know how to tell the time on a watch like this? 40% of the room did not know how to tell the time on a traditional watch. So this generation is really a time-centric generation, very, very hard workers. They base their success on tenure. They made fantastic managers, motivated by fear as well. They were bullied in the workforce. It was almost a normal thing for them. A very, very competitive work environment for the baby boomers as they grew up. Well-educated, jacks of all trades. The big thing with baby boomers, they're leaving. And they're going to leave a really big hole behind for people to fill. And on the heels of them is the X generation. So how many people in the room are the X generation? When I say you're skeptical, reluctant, self-sufficient, I mean it in the nicest way. Your generation actually grew up on the heels of the baby boomers, and you didn't like what you saw. You didn't like the way the baby boomers treated the planet. You didn't like WorldCon and Enron. You were very skeptical about different things that the baby boomers did. Unlike the baby boomers, you are not motivated by pain. You're motivated by pleasure. You could literally draw a line between the generations, and the way we motivate one generation and the other is completely different. You were a completely different generation when you have no memory of scarcity or lack. Now, I'm not saying some of you X generation in the room didn't have it tough growing up. I know some of you did. I know some of you had to share a computer with a sibling, or you didn't get to go to Disneyland and your friends did, or you had one car parked in the driveway. I know some of you had it tough. But you didn't grow up in the same time frame as generations before you. Now, I got to tell you, I remember one day, I grew up, we were quite poor growing up, and I was walking home with my friend Barry one day, and Barry looks at me and he goes, Eddie, he said, what are you guys having for supper tonight? And I said, we're having leftovers. He said, leftovers? He said, is that like a turnover? I said, no, Barry, leftovers. He goes, I don't know. He said, we've never had it. How do you make it? I said, Barry, it's what's left over. I said, Barry, at the end of every meal, Mom takes what's left over, puts it in a Tupperware container, puts it in the fridge. Once or twice a week, we have leftovers. To this day, leftovers is one of my favorite. Leftover spaghetti is one of my absolute favorite meals. I just cook it now and wait a day and eat it because I just find it tastes better the next day. He looks at me with this bizarre look in his face, and I'm thinking, you don't do leftovers? He goes, Eddie, I got 8 brothers. If I don't eat fast, I don't even get what's on my plate. He said, we never have food left over. He said, from one meal to the next. He said, you must have a lot of food in your house. So that's the generation, that's the way the baby boomers grow up. Those of you that are X generation, you didn't grow up in that same time frame. So you actually shun the baby boomers' do or die attitude about putting time in. You're more about getting the job done. You're more about give me a project to do and I'll do it. It doesn't matter if I don't show up till 8:45 in the morning. I might take it home with me. I may teleport in from home. I might do it from Starbucks. But it's not about time for you. It's about getting it done. And you also put your family first and work second. Baby boomers put work first and family second. You put geography first and vocation second. So you choose a place to live first, a place to raise your children. You choose your family first. Now, I think you have it right, to be totally truthful. And that's why I identify more with the baby boomers. I think that that the X generation have that right. So, but you have some interesting things. There's a singer in Canada. His name is David Carroll. Has anyone ever heard of him? He's not very popular, not even in Canada, actually. And I asked the Canadian audiences, and they have never heard of him. He has a little band in the southern part of Ontario, which is actually not that far from you folks, called Sons of Maxwell. Has anyone ever heard of that band? No. And you know what? They didn't hear that. When I say that in Canada, they don't hear either. Has anyone ever seen that YouTube video, United Airlines Breaks Guitars? That's David Carroll. So David Carroll, you're a generation that really embraced social media, more than even the younger generation than you. You're the ones that use social media for something more than pussycats and puppy dogs. You use it for the Arab Spring. You use it to raise money for Haiti. You use it for more powerful reasons. So David Carroll is on an airplane. He's flying from Halifax on the east coast of Canada to Chicago. He has a guitar with him, and they take the guitar and they throw it into the belly of the plane. Now, his guitar is a Taylor guitar, so anyone that's into music, it's a beautiful guitar. They use them on the voice. He sees them throw his guitar into the belly of his plane. When he gets to Chicago, he opens the guitar, and the neck is broke. He goes to United Airlines, and he says, "You have to fix my guitar," and they go, "No, we don't. You didn't read the fine print." So he battled with United for about a year. Finally, at the end of the year, he said to them, he said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a song and I'm going to put it on YouTube." And they go, "Good luck with that." So he puts it on YouTube. In the first 9 days, 15 million people saw the video. Do you think United Airlines fixed his guitar? They fixed his guitar. They put $6,000 in a scholarship fund for young aspiring musicians. And they use his YouTube video as a customer service training tool within the United Airlines organizations of the value of social media. And I remember when I worked years and years ago, I'd work in retail, and we'd bring people in that would do some training for us. And they would say, if you give outstanding customer service, in the next 24 hours, 9 people will hear about it. If you give poor customer service, in the next 24 hours, 72 people will hear about it. If you give poor service now, in the next 24 hours, 8,000 people will hear about it. And it's social media that's driving that. And it's Pandora's box. It's open now, and that's what's out there. So you're a generation that's very well educated. You will make fantastic managers and supervisors and leaders. You're very technically savvy. The big thing with your generation, you're too small. You're not going to handle what's coming your way as the baby boomers start to retire. And you're specialized. So as baby boomers, like you might have somebody, Jim, who's going to retire from your organization as a baby boomer, and he grew up through finance, and he also does the technology, and he's the jack of all trades. And we can't replace Jim with John. Jim will have to be replaced with Susan, Betty, and John. And what we're going to, as we see people in succession planning now, it's not about how do I replace the person, it's how do I replace the roles of those people as they start to head off into their well-deserved retirement. Big thing with your generation, you're driven by pleasure. Now, what? They said there's an antenna up there, and I have to make sure. So, how many of the Y generation in the room? You're my favorite generation to talk about. I have a couple of you at home. Now, some of the characteristics of the Y generation actually fit into the Z generation as well, so I'll talk a little bit about Z. I actually, at one point, never even talked about Z generation, and I offended the few that would show up because a lot of the characteristics at the bottom of the Y generation are very similar in the workforce to the Z, but I am going to, how many have Z generation at home would be the generation after this at home? So you're probably going to want to know a little bit about them, so I am going to talk about them. Y generation, most coddled, most managed, most idealistic generation on the planet. You are a generation that we literally, there's a bug. We literally, or a drone, I'm not really sure. You're a generation that we literally did not let out of our sight. We put you in organized lunch programs, organized school or after school programs, organized sporting events. We just never left you out of our sight. Now, what's interesting is when we send you to work, as parents, we don't know how to let you out of our sight as well. I don't think there's a human resource manager in the country that hasn't been called by somebody's parents about the way they're managing their child. I don't think there's a university professor that hasn't been called by somebody's parents now. There was a time when you would never call a university professor about your children. Now, after a while, I would say this, and I remember a couple of years ago, I'm talking to a group, and somebody put their hand up, and they said, you know, Eddie, we just actually had a candidate show up for an interview with their parents. So now, that's become very common, and as I talk more and more across the country, I would hear more and more people would say the same thing, but I had one last year that I've never encountered before. I had a lady put her hand up, she said, Eddie, she said, we actually just had the candidate's parents show up for an interview without the candidate. So the challenge with this generation is that we really manage them. So I don't know, this happened, in fact, it happened here in the U.S., and I can't remember what state it was in last year. There was a family that were criminally charged for letting their children walk from a park to their house. A 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, it was a 1 mile walk or less than a mile walk. They were charged with abandoning their child and letting their child just roam freely down the road from the park to their house. Now, I got to tell you, I was speaking at a university a couple of years ago, and a professor came up to me afterwards. He said, Eddie, he said, I got to show you something. He said, we just did a little project with our class, and he said, I want to show you a map on my phone. So he takes his phone out, he goes, this is a 15-kilometer radius from the neighborhood I lived in. He said, that is the area that my grandfather was allowed to play in. He said, it went right down to a brook where my grandfather used to go skinny dipping. He said, here is a 7-kilometer radius. He said, that's where I was allowed to play growing up. He said, I wasn't allowed to go to the brook. He said, or my grandfather, my father used to play. And he said, the neighborhood is where I used to play. He said, the backyard is where my daughter plays. So if you let your children outside of your yard, there's actually a name for them. If they roam outside the yard, they're called free range. They literally, you let them outside the fenced area. And so one day I'm in a hotel, I'm watching Dr. Phil. And he has somebody on, and the lady she was driving down the road, she had an infant in the back of her car. She pulls up to the curb, it's pouring down rain, she has to put some mail in the mailbox. The mailbox is 1 car length ahead of where she pulled her car in. She gets out of the car, she goes in front, puts the mail in the mailbox. Unbeknown to her, there's a lady in a coffee shop right where she parked the car, noticed the child unattended in the car, brought it to the attention of 2 police officers that were sitting in the car. They went out and they arrested her for abandoning her child. And I got to tell you, I understand the seriousness of leaving a child unattended in the car. In the province that I live in Canada, last year a lady literally was bringing groceries from her truck into the house, and somebody stole the truck with her child in it. So, you know, there's all kinds of reasons why not. But what I was really taken back by was the audience. You know, they would say things like, you know, she should have been arrested, and the social services should come in, and she should be criminally charged. And I got to thinking about Mom. You know, like, what would Mom do? You know, I grew up in a little town on the East Coast. Mom, beat that cop all the way down the road. Or she'd say, you know what, take him, I don't care, bring him back when he's potty trained. So I got to thinking, what was it like for me growing up compared to what it's like with our kids today? We used to go to a store called a Woco, and Woco was before the Walmarts of the world, and when we would go to the Woco store, Mom and Dad locked me in the car when they would go into the store. It isn't because they didn't love me. I mean, they cracked the window open. We were all good. We had a Chihuahua and everything. But the funny thing is, I remember looking around the parking lot, all the kids were locked in the car. Like, it wasn't like it was just Mom that did it. And so I asked Mom about it, and she said, well, lady, she said, actually, she said, it was even worse than that. She said, when you were really little, we would put you in a pram. We would go down to the 5 and dime store, and she said, you couldn't fit these prams in the stores, the little skinny aisles. He said, we just left you out on the sidewalk in the pram. And she said, I just go out and just pick a pram when we were going. She said, I'm not even sure if you're mine. She said, other than I have her nose, that I would know that I'm hers. So we grew up in a very, very different time than this generation. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I actually lost my daughter in Walmart one day. I mean, we're in Walmart, and she hides under a rack of clothes, and my wife and I are running around looking for her, and I'm like, Sasha, where are you? And nothing, and she hauls out, and finally we raise it up a level, and Walmart has a plan for this. It goes to DEFCON level 4. I mean, they literally will shut the store down. And after a while, she strolls out from underneath a rack of clothes going, here I am, Dad. Well, I was so upset I wanted to kill her. So it was, but see, that's because we don't know how to let these kids go. We don't know how to let them be without. And I talked to someone actually in your environment, and this lady was telling me, she said, we were bringing a young student in to do an intern. So she said, I'm waiting for her to show up, and she said that my receptionist comes down, and she's giggling. She goes, your intern's out there. And she's thinking, well, what am I got to deal with? Why is she giggling? So she said, is it the clothes? Is it, is there something inappropriate? Like, what is it? She said, I'm walking out, and in the frame of the door, I can see her, and she's the perfect specimen of a human being. She goes, well, I wonder what she was giggling at. But she said, as I got closer to the door, I can notice a lady standing next to her with a Staples bag. And when she gets out, she said, I'm Susie's mother, and I have her supplies for a new job. I'm wondering if you could show me where her office is so I can help her get set up. And she said, Eddie, who shows up with their own stapler the first day at work? She said to her, she said, you know what? She said, we have it from here. Like, don't worry, we'll take care of your daughter. But that's the thing with this generation. So now there's some very, very interesting things about this generation. Very well educated, extremely intelligent, communicate very effectively across all the generations. Your grandparents got down on their knees and they spoke to you, and they wanted to spend time with you. You've learned to get along very well with cultures, genders, generations. Very, very technically savvy. I don't know about any of you that are a little bit older in the room, but when my young fellow was about 5 years old, I was a senior vice president in a large organization, and time was something I didn't have a lot of spare, but we would try and do as much as we could with the kids. And so I get a call one day, and they said, Eddie, would you come in and volunteer we have a thing called the Bedford Classic. It's a basketball tournament in the area where our kids grew up, and they said, would you come in and volunteer for the Bedford Classic? And I said, yeah, no, absolutely. And they said, well, how about your wife? Would she come in and volunteer? Oh, yeah, no problem at all. And they said, well, would you come in Thursday night, and we have to do some training before the weekend? I said, well, what do you want me to do? And she said, well, your job would be, we want you to operate the clock. And I go, like, how hard will that be? A guy's going to blow a whistle. I'm going to press a button. Like, I can do that. I'm a pretty smart guy. And they said, well, what about your wife? And I said, well, what do you want her to do? And they said, well, we'd like for her to operate the scoreboard. And I said, you know what? I don't think we need the training. We'll just come in on Friday for the tournament. We're all good to go. So we get in on Friday, and these are little kids, right? Like, it's not like a big basketball game where the scores are, like, at the end of the day, the score might have been 6-0. Lots of times they spend more time tying their shoelaces and their shorts than playing. So the kids start running around. I'm watching my son. Tanya's sitting there beside me. We're having a great time. Guy blows the whistle. I completely forgot to press the button. The parents go, press the button, press the button. So I press the button, and guy blows the whistle. I forgot to press the button to start the clock again. They go, start the clock, start the clock. So after a while, I waited too long, and they said, you got to turn the clock back. Well, I didn't go for the training. I had no idea how to turn the clock back, right? So finally we figure out how to turn the clock back, and somebody scores. My wife goes, who scores? Well, at that point, I'm staring at the thing. I'm not even looking at the kids, and I'm just waiting for that whistle to blow. I go, I don't know. That was your job. My job is this thing. Like, she said, well, I think it was so-and-so. So I put it up on the scoreboard, wrong team. To this day, there are parents in my hometown who won't speak to me because they think that we cost them the tournament that particular year. So I don't know what it is in basketball, halftime or whatever it was, and this young lady comes down to me and she goes, excuse me, sir. She said, I'm here to relieve you. I'm a vice president. I'm being fired by someone 21 years old. But I was relieved. So I looked at her and I said, I'm just curious. I said, do you have someone that could maybe, relieve my wife as well? We'll just go kind of watch the kids. She goes, I'll do it. I go, what, you'll do both? How can you do both? What are you, God? Like, you can't do that. So we're up in the bleachers. I look down. She's got one earbud of the iPod on. She's listening to the music. She's texting her friends, and she's not missing a beat when it comes to stopping the clock or putting the score up. It's because they grew up in a different environment. And I don't know what, those of you in the room that are a little bit older, my wife and I are avid readers, and we need silence and no music. And I remember walking into the room. My daughter was an honor student and walked into the room. She's got Facebook open. She's texting her friends. She's got music playing in the background. She's studying for midterms. And I said to her, Sasha, how can you possibly be studying with all of this noise going on around you? And she said, Dad, it's the only way I can do it. She said, I can't work when it's too quiet. I'm just used to all of this stuff being around me all the time. So this part of the workforce, you're very technically savvy. People say to me all the time, like, Eddie, how do we get this technology out of the kids' hands? And the reality is, how should we get it in their hands but doing something that makes a difference at work? So, that's the key with technology is, if we're going from a place where we have about, 8 people supporting every one retired to 2, the only way we're going to be able to do that is through technology. And I live in an area where there's a lot of farming, and I would watch these harvesters, and they would be going to the field, cutting their swaths, and next to the harvester is another harvester now running parallel without a driver in it. They linked them together via satellite, and they cloned the driver in the first one. So that's the kind of technology, but it's this generation that understands this, absolutely motivated by pleasure. If they don't feel purposeful at work and they're not enjoying themselves, they're not going to stay and they're not going to be engaged. Now, I said I would do a little bit about the Z generation. Z generation is a really interesting generation that are heading into the workforce now. So who is the Z generation in the room? We had just one? Just one? How'd you get in? I lied about my age when I first started working. So Z generation has what we call green fatigue. They're sick of hearing about the environment. Grew up on technology, literally grew up on technology. The big issue with the big thing with this generation is all of the challenges that we're going to have in the workforce has nothing to do with the generation. It has everything to do with their parents. Their parents were very, in fact, most of you will hand your Z generation a piece of technology when they're about 2 years old. They are literally going to be raised by technology. There's a study out of UCLA, and they said that the average Z generation spends less than 35 minutes a week talking to their parents. 35 minutes a week. That's not watching your kids play basketball or putting them in the back of the car with an iPad in their hand and driving them somewhere. It's sitting down having a conversation. That is unlike any generation that's ever walked on the planet before, where they've spent many, many hours a week talking to their parents. They spend 55 hours a week talking to each other, mostly through social media. So here's the challenge, and this is what happened in the UCLA study, and the way it unfolded for me was quite hilarious. I'm sitting watching the UCLA study, and my son walks into the room. My son is a rock star in a band. For some reason, he has never been able to figure out how to pull his pants up to the right side of his butt. So he walks in, his pants are hanging down to here. He's got long hair, gifted musician. He goes, Dad, what are you listening to? I said, a UCLA study. I said, Jay, you'll find this interesting. I said, it's about your generation. And he said, oh, he said that I... So at that moment, when the bass player walks in, the bass player got his hat turned on sideways. His pants are designed not to come up past your butt. And the crotch is down around here. He's got an earring through his lip. He's got long hair. So we're sitting there listening to the UCLA study, and they said, you know what? Kids spend 35 minutes a week talking to their parents, 55 hours a week talking to each other. They are literally being raised by each other. At that point, the bass player looks at me and goes, look at that, Eddie. I'm raising Jason for you. So heaven forbid the bass player is raising my son. So now there's some interesting things about technology, and it's not just Z generation that are going to suffer from this. It's just as much every generation is we have an addiction to this. Every generation has had an addiction. You know, the matures had an addiction. One of their biggest addictions was smoking. Doctors prescribed cigarettes to patients to calm them down. You need to smoke. So they literally prescribed them. It wasn't until years later we realized that they were dangerous. And then baby boomers came along. They had an addiction to, antidepressant drugs in the initial part, but then they had an addiction to work. As the next generations came along, and a lot of this applies to the Y generation, and said you have an addiction to technology. In fact, when you use technology, the brain reduces the same dopamines that happen when you're drinking or eating potato chips or smoking crack. These are little crack devices that are sitting in your pocket. And I know how hard. I watched you in the audience. You know you're not supposed to be on it when you're in an audience, but you're looking down. We are so addicted. We're addicted to. I'm with my daughter, and my daughter. We go to Starbucks. It was at Christmas time. They had those candy cane, coffee. So we go to Starbucks, and she has this, and she's taking a picture and a picture and a picture of this cup of coffee, or whatever it was that cost me $12, right? So she's taking a picture. So I took the straw and I poked a hole in it, and it just collapsed, And she was so upset. She said, "Dad," I said, "Well, you got like 7 pictures." She goes, "But it's Instagram. They don't save until they get the perfect one." She was devastated that I crushed her. So, and what they say happens is that you look for likes. And there's an addiction for those likes. When you post something, if you don't get enough likes, you'll take it down because it's not giving you that level of likes. So, but I got to tell you, the big thing isn't the children, it's the parents of the kids. And just make a note of this. Just watch it yourselves. My wife and I went to a bar the other night. We go to this neighborhood bar every Friday night. We always have nachos and we watch people around us. This young family come in, 2 young boys with their hockey sweaters on. And the mother and father spent the whole time on Facebook, on their handheld devices on Facebook, and their kids were ignored the whole meal. So the other challenge with this generation is the speed at which they expect things to happen. And I don't think, and I'm a big believer, if you sit in my next session, I'm a big believer in inspiration and achieving anything that you say you can set out to do, and I have lots of proof that it can be done. But we do tell our children that they're special. And we tell our children they could be anything. My father used to say to me, "Do you think you're special?" He used the same words, but it was completely different meaning than when we say to our kids, "You are special." Like my father would say, "Do you think you're special?" That was a bad thing. So this generation, when they get to the workforce, the hard thing for us is going to be keeping them interested. But they'll be very well educated. They'll be technically savvy. They'll be a great addition to the workforce. Now, I don't know if, when you think about technology, you should always shut your phone off. Now, there it is. I like to keep my cell phones as long as I possibly can on a plan. This was not my first phone. This was my second phone. First phone came in a bag with a cord on it. 3-watt technology. It was fantastic. This was my second phone. This was in fact, I spoke at a cell convention not that long ago, and they said that people would literally come in and they would buy an extra battery to put it in their other suit pocket so that their jacket wasn't down like this. They could just kind of offset themselves by weight. But this changed the world. This changed the world. I mean, I remember when I was in the technology sector, we could get out and get things done by having this technology, that changed the world. If there's a generation that understands this better than anyone else, it is a younger generation. And that's why we really have to embrace young people in the workforce, because they will figure out, there's more breakthroughs done in the last 2 years than there was in the last 200 years before that. So it's to embrace the young people to be able to enhance this technology. Now, every once in a while, I see some videos that are just perfect. So I'm going to play you 3 videos. The first video is a commercial that ran during the Super Bowl a couple years ago. Cadillac put it out, and it was geared directly at the baby boomers. So you got to think, baby boomers are all about working hard, not taking vacation time, buying stuff. They're a very materialistic generation. The backlash from this was amazing. So then Ford comes out with a commercial, and their commercial was geared toward X and Y generation. And then recently, Chev came out with a commercial that's geared toward the Z generation. So I want to play you the three, just so you can see how different the three generations are. So here's the first one.
Why do we work so hard? For what? For this? For stuff? Other countries, they work, they stroll home, they stop by the cafe, they take August off. Off. Why aren't you like that? Why aren't we like that? Because we're crazy, driven, hard-working believers, that's why. Those other countries think we're nuts. Whatever. Were the Wright brothers insane? Bill Gates, Les Paul, Ali. Were we nuts when we pointed to the moon? That's right. We went up there, and you know what we got? Bored. So we left. Got a car up there, left the keys in it. Do you know why? Because we're the only ones going back up there, that's why. But I digress. It's pretty simple. You work hard, you create your own luck, and you gotta believe anything is possible. As for all the stuff, that's the upside of only taking 2 weeks off in August. N'est-ce pas?
So that was Cadillac's commercial. And they didn't run it very long, and then Ford came out with this commercial, and it was geared toward the next two generations.
Why do I work so hard? For what? For this? For dirt? Other countries, they work, they stroll to the market and buy locally grown food. Locally. Why aren't we like that? Well, more and more of us are like that, because we're crazy entrepreneurs trying to make the world better. Some people might think we're nuts. Whatever. Me, I collect food scraps from restaurants, manure from zoos. Manure. Do you know why? To keep this stuff out of landfills and use it to make good, rich dirt. That's why. Yeah, look, it's pretty simple. You work hard, you believe that anything is possible, and you try to make the world better. You try. As for helping a city grow good, green, healthy vegetables, that's the upside of giving a damn. N'est-ce pas?
So you can see the difference. I mean, one is more about the environment and smaller carbon footprint and buying local, and the other is more about, the Cadillac and taking less time off. So this year, General Motors came out with a whole series of commercials, and they gear them toward our children. So this would be geared toward Z generation.
We hid cameras in 2 different cars, the Chevy Equinox with built-in 4G LTE Wi-Fi and the Ford Escape without.
There's no Wi-Fi. It doesn't even work. I wish I had chocolate chip ice cream. No, raspberry. Chocolate chip.
Keep your legs down.
Raspberry.
Eden, put your leg down, please.
Raspberry.
It's a nice ride. Beautiful day.
I'm jumping on the chocolate chip trampoline.
Hey, you really need to keep your legs down.
I can't.
I don't think I've ever heard our kids this quiet before.
What do you guys think? Should we plan to get this for our car?
Okay. I'm sorry.
You're feeling sad.
Hey, look, guys, we're back.
I didn't even think we were moving.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
So, what'd you guys think of the Chevy Equinox?
It was so quiet. So quiet.
That was awesome.
Yeah?
We want to go back in the car.
So, I mean, you could see the differences. And they're running a whole series of commercials where they're really trying to sell their cars to our children so that we can have them with headphones on in the back of the car. So just a little bit of a wrap-up on the generations. Matures and baby boomers, much more influenced by the Great Depression, no memory of lack, links happiness to the outcome, more concerned with happiness today, motivated by fear, motivated by pleasure, technology resistant, and technology savvy. I mean, really, we have, very, very different generations in the workforce. So I want to wrap up with kind of 2 things. The first is, there's 3 steps to closing the engagement gap. The first is we get to know them. The second is we grow them. And the way we grow people is through understanding their uniqueness, what they bring to the table, their strengths, and leverage that strengths to help us achieve our goals. And the last thing is to inspire. Now, those of you that are sitting into my next session, I have dedicated my last probably 10 or 15 years on the whole inspiration part. You know, how do we set goals to stick? So when we look at inspiration, it's about setting goals for the future and really being able to stick to those goals. So in closing, if we kind of look back to some of the things that we chatted about in the last little bit, one was the impact of the aging demographics. There's 3 reasons why we, become engaged or unengaged at work. It's why is the job important to us? Who am I going to be working with? What am I going to be doing? Getting to know each other at work, and we're going to do that based on our gender, culture, and age. We're going to leverage our strengths in the workplace, and we want to be inspired. So we have 10 seconds left. Anyone have any questions? Questions, comments, challenges? Actually, that's a good question. The question was that the time frame between generations seems to be getting shorter from the Great Depression to now, and I don't know if it's because the change in the characteristics of the generations are being. But the other thing you'll know, if you really follow this, the actual dates have changed as well. So 1962, I'm considered a baby boomer, but at one time that would have been a next generation. So it's almost like the voting lines are changing them, on where they are. But I have no idea why that reasoning is, but it's a good valid point. Any other questions, comments?
It seems that this is uniquely North American and particularly American, but you said at the beginning, our future growth and population will come from immigrants. And will they have their own version of baby boomers and matures, et cetera?
That's a fantastic question. So the question was, the numbers look to be more North American-wide. In fact, the numbers are U.S. So these statistics are based on the U.S. numbers. And as more immigrants come, and so the thing, when I talk about the numbers here today, we're talking about what's happening in the U.S. When an immigrant comes to our country, it changes everything. Like, for example, the birth rate of 1.86 is traditional American birth rate. The more immigrants we bring in, the higher their birth rate is. So that can skew that number to our advantage, so we would have a higher birth rate. And the other is, I talk to other countries, they wouldn't relate at all to a lot of this. Like, I remember talking to somebody from West Africa, and he said, Eddie, none of this makes sense to me, because when you talk about generations, he said, I grew up in a world that you couldn't even imagine. He said, so none of this works for me, so you're absolutely right. Somebody who's come to our country from another country, this may not make sense. And that's why I always say, when we work with someone, it's getting to know the uniqueness about that person, having the conversations, getting to understand them based on their age, culture, and gender, so that I would understand, if I'm working with you, what's unique about you based on where you came from and your age. Any other questions? So the question was, so her question was, what if you identify with a generation that you're not? And I personally identify more with the X generation, and I'm a baby boomer. So, and that's why, again, it really comes down to unique characteristics, that I understand the characteristics that I am, but also that I understand the characteristics of the people that I work with. So, because we don't want to pigeonhole someone just because you were born in a certain thing, this is the way you're going to act. There'll be a lot of factors that will change that, and it could be culture, geography, or so on. Any other questions?
I don't want to be a sad sack, but the research I read would suggest that many of the jobs we have today are moving to automation and robotics taking care of it.
Yes.
Right? And getting rid of all those kind of service jobs. And that the world of tomorrow may have very little theory of the jobs that we have today.
Right.
Right? So so I'm more concerned with the other end, having a daughter, the Z range, of preparing them for what comes tomorrow. They're saying smaller jobs, shorter term jobs, consultants, guess I'm having a hard time making those two things.
So the question is, as we automate more jobs and we outsource more jobs to people from outside of the country that would come in, and our young people, what jobs will be available for them? Well, and there's a lot of factors that weigh in here. One is our younger generation today don't want to do a lot of the jobs that are those jobs that we are now automating. And I'll give you an example. I spoke to a horticultural society group last week, and farmers are seeing crops rot in their fields. When there are people in the local areas that could work those fields, they don't want those jobs. Fishermen are seeing fish rot on their docks on either one of the coasts because people don't want those jobs either. I noticed Proactive, the stuff you put on your face for acne, in the mall here. It was either here in town or Detroit. My wife and I were yesterday. There's nobody working the booth anymore. You just put your money in and the products come out. And I think for some shoppers, they're probably more comfortable just buying the product out of a box than they are actually talking to someone about it. But I think that the challenge with our younger people is finding them careers that they're going to want to do for the rest of their lives. And a lot of those jobs that we're outsourcing and automating are not the jobs that they're going to want to do anyway. So the challenge is heading them down a path and I remember with my own son, because my son is a musician, and we spent probably $30,000 on different training programs in a community college for him, actually. Because he's picked a music trade, which really means to me I'm going to support him for the rest of his life. But I remember driving him to high school, and all of the counselors were trying to talk him out of music and said, Jay, you should take pipe fitting or electrician or mechanics. And I would tell him, Jay, take music. I mean, it's what you want to do for the rest of your life. I talk to people every day that hate their jobs. And they come to work every day and they hate it. And I always tell them, Jay, do what you want to do. And you know what? We'll send you learn music. One thing with education, you can never take it away from someone, right? And you would all know that. So, Jay, do this, and if you can't find work, I'll send you back to be a pipe fitter. So I always think when we look at our kids is try and find them something that they want to do for the rest of their lives that will be, and we did this really interesting exercise. My father, a few years back, went in the late 1800s, took all of the church records and digitized them for a bunch of churches in our local area. So I looked at all the jobs that were at the turn of the century. Virtually none of them existed anymore, like sea merchant and all these different things that just don't exist anymore. So a lot of the jobs that are out there right now won't exist in the future anyway. So it's how do you create that career? Because the reality is the numbers are in the favor of the young people right now. With the declining population, there will be jobs. So the number, and the hard thing is when you're sitting at home right now underemployed with student loan debt, to feel that, but the reality is this isn't like Y2K where we're saying, the sky's going to fall at midnight. There's a huge percentage of baby boomers that are leaving the workforce that are going to leave holes, and they have to be filled, and we have to automate because there will not be enough people to be able to come behind and take those jobs. So I would focus on finding something for them to do that they want to do. Any other questions? We probably have time for one quick. So let me tell you just a little bit about what we're going to do with those of you that are staying. I wrote a book entitled Bring About What You Think About, and it's about setting goals for the future and setting yourself up for goals that stick, and it was absolutely life-changing for me. So if you're sitting in on that session, it's completely different than what we just did. It'll help you at work, but it'll also help your relationships, your health. And if you're not, I do have a couple books available out there. They're $20. My wife is just outside the door, and you could pick one of the books up. For the baby boomers, the print's fairly big, and you could read it inside of 4 hours. So for younger people that don't have the attention span, it will work for you as well. So for those of you that are staying, I'll see you back shortly. This is my favorite speech to deliver. This is a presentation that can be absolutely life-changing for some of you in the audience. And so when I kind of travel around and I talk on two topics, I've become an expert on the impact of the whole aging demographics, but this particular speech changes people's lives. So I'm really glad you decided to participate in this. I'm going to try my best to make sure that you get the absolute most out of this next hour that we spend together. Now, I got to tell you that I always had a kind of a what-if question. I'd always say, you know, well, Eddie, what if there's a better way? What if there's a way that, you know, you could sell more products? What if there's a way that you could lose weight? Or a way that you could be a better dad or a better manager at work? And what if it was easy? See, every one of us are really good at something. You're either great at your job, you're a great mom or dad, you can eat anything, never gain an ounce, or maybe you're good at playing the game of golf. But what if it was as easy as changing the way we think? And I believe that it is. You know, when we think about it, what if you could take the skill of the things that you're really good at and move it into an area of your life where you're not completely happy with the results that you're getting? And what if changing the way you think was all we had to do? So I have to tell you how this all started for me. For me, it started in a little pub on the east coast of Canada called the Old Triangle Pub. And sometimes if you want to be inspired, head to a bar. But in this particular case, I go to the Old Triangle Pub and I'm meeting with a client of mine. His name is Stephen. And we're having a great conversation with each other. And partway through the conversation, I'm telling him, and at the time I was senior vice president of a large organization, a big aerospace company. We were doing hundreds of millions of dollars in business, and I had all these lofty goals. And he looked at me, he said, Eddie, he said, you know what? He said, if you just change the way you think, your whole life would change. And I looked at him and I said, Stephen, I said, what are you talking about? He said, Eddie, you have stinking thinking. I said, I have what? He said, you have stinking thinking. He said, you're telling me all the goals, but you're also in the same breath telling me all the reasons why it's not going to happen. You're setting yourself up to fail. Now, I got to tell you, I didn't believe him. I read all of those books. I read Norman Vincent Peale, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Dale Carnegie. Like, I was very well read in all that personal development world. But there's a big difference between reading a book and actually applying it in your life. And lots of times we think we're applying it, but obviously my words were telling Steve something very different. So anyway, I go home that day and I Googled some of the stuff that we had chatted about. And little did I know, the second I pressed that enter button, my life was going to change forever. It would send me down a path that would be long-lasting and far-reaching, and I would notice changes. And first I noticed changes in myself. And the first change that I noticed was I went from being 225 pounds to 175 pounds. But I became a better father, I became a better manager, I became a better friend to people. But then I noticed my sphere of influence started to change people around me. And the first one that I really noticed was my daughter, Sasha. You know, at one point, my wife and I questioned if she'd ever see grade 12. We questioned if she would live to see grade 12. You know, I joke about it now. My daughter's in her 7th year of a 4-year program at university, and she's an absolutely wonderful young lady. We just moved her close to where we live. She has a job as a recruiter, and she's just a joy to be around. My son, Jay comes to me one day, and he goes, hey, Dad, I can make it to the principal's office with my eyes closed. Makes your father proud to know your son has achieved such greatness. You know, Jay is a young, aspiring musician. He's a fantastic songwriter. He collaborates with musicians all over the world. He's a joy to be around. He's a very charitable person. He's the voice of reason with his friends, which I never thought that I would ever say. My wife, Tanya, who's with me today, Tanya and I have been married more than 30 years, but I believe we're closer now than we've ever been in their life. And, you know, the way to really test a relationship is, you know, Tanya and I work together, so we basically spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We travel about 6 months a year on the road. If you really want to know how close you are, share one bathroom and one room for long periods of time and travel a lot. It really, but, you know, we're very romantic. We're going to leave here tonight. We'll go into Detroit for the evening. We'll have a very romantic night. We'll have a nice dinner. We still have that in our relationship, I think more now than we had for years. But I could measure it at work. I could measure the gross profit contribution in my clients. I could measure things that were happening in their lives, people that read my book that had impact. So that's what I want to do today. I want to pass this on to you so that you can learn some of the things that I did. Now, I did a lot of research, and I researched 3 areas of the way the brain works. So the first thing I looked at was the science behind the way our brain works. So one thing we know for sure, when you're happy, passionate, excited, your brain works completely different when you're sad or depressed. So when you're happy, passionate, excited, the brain operates at a higher frequency. We're more alert. The body secretes serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone. We're more creative. We digest our food better. We have better conversations. If people that sell for a living, they actually sell more products and services when they feel good because they have more creative conversations. However, when we have fear, anxiety, and stress in their life, the body stops secreting serotonin and starts to secrete cortisol, which is a fight-or-flight hormone. We don't digest our food as well. We don't have as good conversations. We're lethargic. It actually holds us back. And then I looked at psychology. So psychology kind of comes down to simplify questions and answers. So when you get up in the morning, we normally ask ourselves a question. You might get up in the morning and maybe on a Monday morning you might say, I'm not feeling very good. I'm feeling a little bit down. In a millisecond, your brain will answer. It has to. It goes into the unconscious and it looks for reasons why you feel the way that you say you're feeling. And it might run back to you and it'll say, you put a couple pounds on over Christmas, you've had a fight with your spouse, things aren't going very good at work, you're basically a loser. And what happens is you'll go out into the world, psychologists call this social proof, you'll look for proof. Somebody will slam the door on you, you'll spill a cup of coffee, you'll get in an argument with somebody, you'll get stuck in traffic. But if you get up tomorrow morning and you asked a simple question that's different, if you get up tomorrow morning and the question I asked every single morning when I get up is, why am I so grateful? And the minute I ask that question, the brain has to answer it. And it'll say you work in a wonderful industry, you're surrounded by beautiful people, you get to travel, you have a lovely wife, you're a winner. And you'll go out into the world and you'll look for proof. You'll have a wonderful conversation with somebody. Somebody will buy you a free cup of coffee. You'll do really well at your job today. And then I looked at divinity. And divinity is when something doesn't fit in one of those two categories. And not to simplify divinity at all, but it's when you can't explain something. Where you can't explain it by science and you can't explain it by psychology. And let me give you an example. A few years ago, I had the privilege of speaking at an organization called the $1 Million Roundtable. And the $1 Million Roundtable is the top 1% of insurance reps in the world. There's 35,000 of them. Every year they get together somewhere exotic. Usually about 8,000 will get together for a conference. They come from all over the planet. This particular year, the conference was in Toronto, Canada. So I'm speaking to a group, and there are about 400 people in the audience that are from Vietnam. So after the conference was over, this young lady leaves the conference and she's flying back to Vietnam and she has a connecting flight at the LAX airport. So she's at the LAX airport, she decides she wants a cup of coffee. She goes to the Starbucks and she says, I'd like to have a medium cup of coffee, please. Well, they don't sell medium coffee at Starbucks because they're too fancy. They sell grande, and grande incidentally doesn't mean medium, which is really quite ironic. They give her this grande coffee, and she looks at it, and she goes, oh my goodness, too big, too big. Well, unbeknown to her, there were 3 young ladies on the same connecting flight right behind her. They looked at it, and they said, you know what, why don't we order 2 cups of coffee, we'll ask for an empty cup, we'll sit down, and we'll share it among the 4 of us. So they sat down, and they started introducing themselves to each other, and the young lady that left the conference that I spoke at, she looked at them, she said, I grew up in a very, very poor village in Vietnam. She said, in fact, we were so poor growing up. She said, after mom and dad or my parents had 8 children, they gave the kids away. And they were raised by families that could afford to feed them, and they would work the fields for those families. And she said, I was given away. She said, I wasn't one of the children that were raised by my biological parents. Another young lady sitting at the table had a confused look on her face. She said, I'm actually from the same village in Vietnam. She said, a very similar situation to you. She said, we gave our kids away as well, which was a common practice. She said, but I was raised by my biological parents. At a chance meeting at the LAX airport, they discovered they were sisters. So that's when you're at the right place at the right time. So I said to myself, well, what if it didn't matter whether it was science, psychology, or divinity? Is there something I could do to make more things happen in my life that I wanted to have happen and less things that I don't? And it really comes down to one statement. Wherever I focus my attention and I put energy behind it, I bring more of it into my life. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we look at attention is where we put our thoughts. So, and the interesting thing with our thoughts is that they're subtle. Every thought you're having is doing one of 2 things. It's either moving you toward your goals or it's moving you away from your goals. And when I walked in the bar and I was sitting down talking to my client Stephen, the thoughts I were having were moving me away from my goals. So it really comes down to directive thinking, and it works something like this. Let me just take this off for a second. For some reason, I'm pulling that off. So there's an old proverb, and it says, sow a thought, reap an action. Anyone in the room here golf? Any golfers in the room? So I'm going to give you a little golf lesson now. A few years ago, I was asked to go to Bermuda to work with the Bermudian healthcare group. And it's February. Now, I live by the Rockies, so it's very, very cold where I'm at. It's very snowy, very cold. We don't get to golf much in the winter at all, actually. So I'm going to go down to Bermuda in February, and I'm thinking, if I'm going to Bermuda in February, I'm taking my golf clubs with me. Now, I got to tell you, I have really good golf clubs. And I don't have really good golf clubs because I'm a good golfer. I have really good golf clubs because I'm a good father. And when you're a good dad and you take up a hobby, every special occasion the kids will buy you something. I bought a motorcycle a couple of years ago. Every special occasion the kids will buy me something. New gloves, saddlebags. Sometimes they didn't even know they were buying it. I would just tell them, you just bought me saddlebags for Christmas. And thanks. So that particular year, the kids bought me a tailor-made 580 driver. So now, for those of you who don't golf, a tailor-made 580 driver is basically a toaster on the end of a stick. It's a great big head on a big long stick, and the idea is that you put the ball really high like a child playing t-ball, and you have a bigger sweet spot, and you should be able to hit the ball better. So off I go down to Bermuda. I got my golf clubs with me, and I'm going to meet with the senator, and the first place I'm going to meet him is on the golf course. So I have a handler that's driving me, and we're driving up to the golf course, and he said to me, he said, Eddie, he said, you're going to love this golf course. He said, it's an amazing golf course. He said, probably one of the nicest golf courses in all of the Caribbean. And he said, you're going to love golfing with the senator because he used to be a PGA golf professional. Now, I got to tell you, sometimes when I speak in front of an audience, I get a little bit nervous, but not near as nervous as I get on the front tee box when you have to hit the ball in front of people that might be standing around the clubhouse. So we get to the clubhouse, not only are there people, there's probably 50 to 100 people that are standing around the clubhouse, and they all love to watch the senator play golf. So they do this thing where they spin a top. So you spin a top and it tells who goes first. So senator goes before me, takes a golf club out of the bag, looked like it came over on the Mayflower, a little small head on it, some black tape on the handle, puts the ball right down on the grass, addresses the ball, and hits the ball straighter and farther than I've ever seen a golf ball go in my life. It was an amazing sight to see. It's my turn. I pull that tailor-made 580 driver out, pull the head cover off it. He looks at me and he goes, man, that is some set of clubs. He said, you must be some golfer. The sweat starts to pour from my forehead and drip off my glasses. Now, I got to tell you, golf is a weird sport. The things you're supposed to think about when you're hitting that ball, they tell you, bend at the knees, put your butt out like you're sitting on a bar stool, put your head down, put your arms over. So I got a club that's way out there. I've never swung it before in my life. The ball's that high in the air. I'm all ready to take a shot, and I had a thought. I noticed the left-hand side of me was a clubhouse with a lot of glass windows in it. I was thinking, wouldn't it be embarrassing if I hit the clubhouse with all these people? So I take a swing, sure enough, the ball goes off the heel of the golf club and hits the windows. Now, they must have anticipated people like me golfing, and they were probably bulletproof. It simply bounced off the windows, did hit two very expensive cars in the parking lot, and went back onto the fairway again. For those of you that are golfing, you're back on the green stuff, and that's a good thing, right? So I'm out, and I'm hitting that ball, and I got to tell you, I think it was $500 US a round to play golf on this golf course. And I was wishing I was anywhere on the planet other than on the golf. I was making an absolute fool of myself. I was uncomfortable. If I'm about 4 or 5 holes into it, I'm all ready to take another shot. I'm hitting the ball down here, and I said to myself, where'd the pro go? And I look, he's hiding behind a tree. Now, he's over here. I'm hitting the ball down there. There's no way I'm going to hit him, right? I had a thought. Wouldn't it be embarrassing if I hit the senator, right? I take a swing. Sure enough, now the ball goes off the toe of the club and heads right for the senator, who was a seniors PGA golf professional. And the interesting thing is, he could jump this high for his age. He has great agility. And I remember saying to myself, oh my goodness, Eddie, you teach people this. You teach people about putting their thoughts where you want things to go, and you're sitting there thinking about all the obstacles. Why wouldn't you just kind of calm your mind for a second and say, In the fairway, Eddie, in the fairway. And you know what? I do that now. When I play golf, I take a deep breath, I look at the ball, and I'll concentrate on where I want the ball to go. And you know what? It works. I play half-decent golf now. But that's the way I live my life. I live my life now by focusing my attention on where I want things to go and not the obstacles in every area of my life. So that was the first part of sow a thought, reap an action. The second part is sow an action, reap a habit. So everyone fold your hands like this in front of you. Another one of these little scientific studies. How many of you had your right thumb on top? Right thumb, look around. Intellects. I would see that there would be a lot of intellects in this kind of an environment. How many of your left thumbs on top? You're the sexy ones. So now what I want you to do is simply do it the other way, with the other thumb on top. Didn't make the intellects more sexy, but it's weird, isn't it? Now fold your arms like this. Now do it with the other hand out. Isn't it weird? So what happens is we formed habits, and some of the habits you formed are wonderful. Some of the habits you formed are why you're successful at anything that you do in your life. It could be why you're successful at your relationships. It might be why you're successful at your job. But you have also formed habits that are holding you back. And they're habits that are undermining your success. And you didn't even know you formed them because they happened at an unconscious level. The next thing is to sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. Every single time I walk in a room to deliver this speech, I always say to myself, Eddie, let's change a life today. And it starts with a thought. Everything always starts with a thought. If you leave here today thinking something different, maybe you're going to pick the phone up and call that person. Maybe you're going to take that additional thing you want to do at work. Maybe you're going to reach out to meet someone, or maybe you're going to ask someone on a date. But it always starts with a thought. There's nothing in your life that didn't start with a thought first. I think I'll apply for that job. I think I'll ask that person out on a date. I think I'll take a vacation here. I think I'll buy that car. Every single thing starts with a thought. And by changing the way we think, we can absolutely change our destiny. That was the first part. And then the second part is wherever we put our emotions. So let me share with you an example. If I can get everyone just to stand up for a second. When we're at the bottom end of the scale, when we have fear, anxiety, and stress in our life, when the body is in that cortisol fight or flight mode, we actually hold success back. We push it away. We resist things from happening. So everyone put your hands together like this. I used to take a picture of this and just say I had a standing ovation. But so all you're going to do is you're going to count to 5 and bring your hands out to here, and you're going to count to 5 and you're going to bring your hands in together like this. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, you have to count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, look, now I got this all messed up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is this exciting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's like a type of emotion. It's like I come in the morning and say, oh, Eddie, how you doing? Oh, not bad. You know, it's cold out and things aren't going very good at home. That's a type of, but what if we were to go to the other side of the scale? Because when we go up to the other side of the scale, we actually bring things into our lives. When we're happy, passionate, excited, in the world of employee engagement, engaged employees live up here. They're happy, passionate, excited. They have purpose. So when we're at that end of the scale, we actually bring more things. So instead of doing that, I used to get people to do this. Big mistake. First couple times I did it, I realized big liability issue. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your fist and you're going to throw it in the air like that, and you're going to holler the word now as loud as you can. And I don't want you to think of this as a college. I want you to think of this as you're a bunch of real estate agents on a sales retreat, and you're going to be the loudest audience I've ever heard. So now I'm not going to holler it because I have a mic on and I'll blow you out of the room. But on the count of 3, I want you to holler the word now as loud as you can. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Oh, actually, that's not bad. That's not bad. But I know you can step it up a notch. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Oh, gee, that is really good. Okay, now, don't look at me. Look at each other as you make fools of yourselves. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah! See the difference? See the smiles? Feel the blood flowing? Okay, you can sit down. Now I got to tell you, so if we link our thoughts and our emotions together, so we focus our attention on where we want things to go, we live a more happy, passionate, excited life, something happens to us and we bring more things into our life. Now I got to tell you, I think I've stood in front of every type of audience. In fact, just in January, You know, I think of the diversity of the audiences. I spoke to a group of steel workers. They look like a bunch of pirates looking back at me. I spoke to a group of undertakers, which were a really funny audience. I was really educators, horticultural people, travel agents. But I got to tell you, I have never met anyone who's made it to the top of their game by complaining. I've never seen it. You know, my dad used to have a saying. He would say, "A squeaky wheel gets grease." I think if you complain enough, you'll get something. Somebody will give you something. Not long-lasting happiness and success. Long-lasting happiness and success comes from focusing your attention on the outcome and creating the right environment. So I want to share with you a story that it's a true story, and I'm sure some of you may have heard this because it circulates the education circuit quite a bit. It's about a teacher by the name of Miss Thompson. Miss Thompson walks into the class at the beginning of the year, and she looks at all of the students. And the story really talks about the importance of focusing your attention on the outcome and creating that right environment. She looks at all the students and she says, "I'm going to love everyone here exactly the same." But she knows it's not true. There's a little boy in the class, his name is Billy Stoddard, and Billy's nothing but trouble. He has poor hygiene, he's disruptive in the class, he picks fights with the other kids, his grades are very poor. Sure enough, as the year started to progress, he was exactly the way that she had anticipated. In fact, she would get pleasure from putting F's on his report and circling it in red ink, kind of like that movie The Blind Side, when that student was trying to turn his life around and that one teacher kept marking him poorly. So as the year started to progress, she was supposed to read the reports from how the kids all got to where they were, and she reads Billy's last because, quite frankly, she wasn't that interested. She opens the first page and it says, "Billy is an absolutely outstanding student, a lovely child, a joy to teach." She goes, "That's odd, it's not the Billy I'm seeing now." Gets to the next year and says, "Oh, Billy's struggling a bit this year. He's a little disruptive in class. His grades are slipping, but we think it has something to do with his mother's illness." Gets to the next year and it says, "Billy's not doing that good at all this year. He's quite disruptive and he's picking fights with the other kids and his grades are slipping, and we think it has something to do with the death of his mother." Gets to the next year and it says, "Billy's not doing good at all this year. Now his hygiene has slipped and he's picking fights with the kids. His grades are poor. And we think it has something to do with the fact that his dad is having such a hard time managing things on his own." She sits down and she starts to cry and she says, "You know what? I'm going to stop focusing on what's wrong with Billy. I'm going to start focusing on what's right about Billy. I'm going to start focusing on the outcome, where I want him to go." A couple weeks go by and the kids all bring in Christmas presents, and Billy brings in a little box poorly wrapped with brown paper and string, and kids start making fun of him, and she shushes them down and she opens the gift, and inside is a little rhinestone bracelet with a couple rhinestones missing and 3/4 of a bottle of cologne. He looked at the teacher, he said, "Miss Thompson," he said, "that was my mother's favorite bracelet and that was her favorite cologne." So every time there was something special, a presentation, a test, or something that she would have to do in class that mattered to him, she put a little squirt of that cologne on and wear that bracelet. Mind you, it was before the scent-free policy in the school and you can get away with that, but what she was trying to do was raise his emotion on the days that really mattered, right? Bring him up that scale, happy, passionate, excited. Well, at the end of the year, Billy had an outstanding year. And he wrote a little note to the teacher and it simply said, "Dear Miss Thompson, just want to let you know, best year I ever had in school. You're the best teacher I ever had. I love you very much. Signed, Billy." And off into the world he went. So we can see the impact that she had that day by focusing her attention on the outcome, and it was clearly evident by his grades that year. But a few years later, she received another note, and it said, "Dear Miss Thompson, I just want to let you know that my father's not been feeling well the last few years, but I am finishing up high school. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. I love you very much. Signed, Billy," and into the world he went. A few years later, she received another note, and it said, "Dear Miss Thompson, I just want to let you know Dad's since passed away. I'm just finishing up university. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. I owe this all to you. I love you very much. Signed, William Stoddard, MD." So now we see the impact that she made that one day by changing her focus. But it didn't end there. She received one more note a few years later, and it said, "Dear Miss Thompson, I just want to let you know that I have met the person of my dreams, and we're going to get married, and I would like for you to come to the wedding." She arrived at the church, and they put her in the pew set aside for the mother of the groom, and she sat there wearing the rhinestone bracelet and the scent of his mother. So we see the impact that she has. But you know, we all have that ability, especially those that are in the education field. We have the ability to focus the attention on the outcome, create that right environment for people to be able to succeed. But it really does tell to the story of that importance of those two things. So how do we make it work? So there's 3 steps, and I got to tell you, when I put this book together, I didn't set out to write a book. I actually wrote a journal that changed my life. And what happened to me was just before I met Stephen in the bar that day, I remember walking through a shopping mall, very expensive suit on, senior vice president in a company, never had to eat lunch alone, everybody wanted my time. And I remember walking through the mall and saying, Eddie, you have everything. You have money, you have a house, a boat, cars, exotic vacations. Everybody wants your time. Why are you so unhappy? And what happened was I got really good at doing things I hated doing every day. And I really wanted to make change. So I came up with a journal that helped me do it. And I never set out to publish a book. But every once in a while, a friend would come to me and they were struggling. They'd say, Eddie, I'm struggling with my weight, or I'm struggling with my relationship or my career. And I'd give them the journal with all of the spelling mistakes. And they would come back to me and they'd say, Eddie, you should publish this. And I was embarrassed. I didn't think anyone would be interested. And finally, we waited quite some time. And I sent the transcript to an editor. She sent it back with that much red ink on it. I was so embarrassed. I put that away for another year before I actually ended up eventually publishing it. So I want to share with you the steps that I used in my own personal life that you can use in yours, and they're really easy. And if you follow these steps, you'll find big differences in whatever area of your life that you want to change it. The first thing is you got to figure out what area of your life, what goals you want to set. They could be your personal goals, they could be health, they could be career, they could be friendship, they could be social. And there's 2 ways that you're going to kind of dive down to look for what the goals are. And the first thing is you got to listen to your emotions. Your emotions are telling you everything you need to know. When you feel fear, anxiety, and stress, stop for a second. Ask yourself, what do I feel? Why am I feeling fear, anxiety, and stress? And whatever's causing it, you want the opposite of it. And I'm not one of those people who say just go around being positive all the time, because your negative thoughts actually have value. They'll help direct you away from certain areas of your life. So if you walk into a room and you're with someone and you feel fear, anxiety, and stress when you're around that person, it's telling you you're around the wrong person. Or it's telling you you have the wrong relationship with that person. You know, if that's a friend that makes you feel bad every time you're around them, well, maybe you shouldn't be around them. But if that happens to be your son or your mother or your brother, then it's not that easy. So then it might be telling you that you want a better relationship, that you need to work in that relationship. For me, the big one for me was my weight. I remember one day getting out of the shower and looking at myself and saying, Eddie, what happened? Like, how did you get to here? And not too long after that, I remember going to a health conference where somebody from the federal government was talking about health spending and the challenge it was going to have. And my wife and I were doing a presentation about 800 miles or 800 kilometers. I don't know what that is, miles, like 12 or something. But and we were in the car, and I was talking to my wife. I said, you know, if we want a good lifestyle when we get older, we got to get more healthy. It's like buying insurance today. We got to get more healthy today. So you got to listen to what your emotions are telling you, and you want the opposite. That's the first step. The second step, and every employee who's ever worked for me, and this is very sensitive. There's a magic thing up there, and you have to be just perfect. Oh, look. You know what? I think there's somebody up there pushing that button, just messing with me. They're at my computer, and they're just... So every employee who's ever worked for me has done a dream sheet. And a dream sheet is simply a bucket list. It's a list of all the things that you want to change in your life, all the things that you want to accomplish. And they'll cover everything from education, relationships, the spirituality, like whatever you want to change in your life, you write it in the dream sheet. Because something magic happens when we write something down. The brain has a function called RAS, and it's like the Google search engine of the brain. It looks for clues when we impregnate it into our unconscious. And you've all experienced this. Like you might decide you want to buy a new car. And you say, I think I'm going to buy a Honda Civic. And you'll go outside today and you'll notice every Honda Civic that's out there. They all existed yesterday, but now that you want one, you'll notice one. Like I drive a motorcycle, and because I drive a motorcycle, I notice every bike on the road. The problem with those of us who bike is people don't see us because they don't notice us. But when it's something that's in your unconscious, you look for it. You know, I'm looking for a new pair of glasses, and I can't help but look at every pair of glasses that I see. Now, when I make a decision and buy a new pair of glasses, I won't look for them anymore. It's something magical happens when we write something down. So if this will go to the right one now, every once in a while a weird one comes along. And so I'm presenting to a group at a fundraiser. And a lady comes up to me afterwards. She said, Eddie, she said, I don't get the whole dream sheet thing. I said, let's do one. So we start writing a dream sheet. And she gets down about 13, 14 items down, and she writes down, I want to manifest a horse. I got to tell you, you know, all my vice president experience, horse manifestation has never been anywhere on my resume. It almost sounded creepy to me when she said that. I said, manifest a horse? What do you mean, manifest a horse? So you'll have to bear with me because some of this geography is not going to make sense to you. But she said, Eddie, she said, I bought a piece of property. And she said, I bought it with owning a horse in mind. I said, oh, okay, I understand. I said, so you want to, yeah. She said, I said, okay, write it down. So I said, when would, and it was June the 24th. I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was June the 20th. I said, when would you like to manifest this horse? She said, I'd like to have this manifested by July the 25th. I said, okay, write it down. So she writes down, manifest a horse by July the 25th. So I'm thinking, that's just another crazy person I'm never going to have to deal with again. And so off into the world I go. Well, sure enough, I get a phone call about a month later. And the phone call and an email. And it went something like this. And it's actually quite amazing. She says to me, she says, Eddie, she said, I got to tell you, she said, 2 weeks after we did that dream sheet together and I wrote down, I want to manifest a horse. And I said, yes. She said, well, I was at a client's place in New Brunswick. So New Brunswick, a province in Canada. And she said, I was in New Brunswick. And she said, I asked the client, I was telling this client that I'm working with this executive coach, but she wasn't working with me. She said, I'm working with this executive coach and we're going to manifest a horse. She said, the woman burst out laughing at me like I was crazy. She said, look, I don't know anything about manifesting horses. However, she said, out in the lobby, there's a tack magazine. In the back of the magazine, there are horses for sale. Go take a look. So she goes out, she looks in the back of the magazine. Not only are there horses, there is the kind I didn't know horses came in different flavors, but it was the kind of horse that she wanted. So she said to the woman, she said, you don't mind if I use your phone to give this a call and see if the horse is still available? She said, no, go right ahead. She said, I'm kind of curious where you're going with this. So she picks the phone up and she calls this lady and she says, I understand you have a horse for sale. The woman goes, no, where are you getting this at? She said, it's in a magazine. I'm looking at it right now. She said, no, dear. She said, that's got to be some old, that magazine. She said, when was that published? She looks at the front cover. It's 4 years old. She said, dear, she said, I can tell you, she said, we never did sell that horse. She said, we still have it. She said, we would sell it, but she said, we just never could find anyone suitable for it. She said, tell me a little bit about yourself. So she started telling a little bit about herself, and a woman stopped her in the middle of the conversation. She looked at the area code that she dialed. She said, I noticed you're calling from New Brunswick. And the woman said, yes. She said, I got to tell you, she said, we're not interested in selling the horse to anyone from New Brunswick. She said, not that people in New Brunswick shouldn't own horses, mind you. She said, it's just too far from where we live, and we'd love to be able to visit this horse, and we would like to sell it to somebody in, closer. She looked at the number she had dialed. It was 902, which is the Nova Scotia Exchange. And she said, I see you're in Nova Scotia. And the woman says, no, dear. She said, I'm not in Nova Scotia. I'm in Prince Edward Island. She said, we never could afford our own exchange over here, so we share the Nova Scotia one. The woman said, well, I actually live in PEI. She said, that's where I'm from. She said, now where do you live in PEI? She said, I live at such and such a cove, because in PEI nothing is a road or a hill. It's just a cove or a bump or something, right? She said, I live at such and such a cove. She said, what color house do you live in? She said, I live in a yellow house. She said, isn't that something, dear? She said, I'm looking out my back window at your house right now. She said, you just live across the harbor from me. She said, you know what? I'll sell you the horse if you want it. She said to her, she said, how much do you want for the horse? She said, $6,500. She said, Eddie, I didn't have any money left. I bought the house, and I just didn't have the $6,500. She said, well, I'll have to get back to you. So she goes home, and she said to her mother, she said, Mom, she said, you're not going to believe it. I found the perfect horse. Literally lives across the harbor. But she said, it's $6,500, and I don't have $6,500. She looked at her mother, and she said, her mother looked at her, and she said, she said, I have $6,500. I'll give you the money. You go buy the horse. She said, Mom, I didn't know you had $6,500. She said, that's why I never told you. You'd have spent that money long ago. She sends a picture of the horse standing in her backyard 1 month after she wrote it on the dream sheet. Now, I understand how that happens. When we write something down, we look for clues. We have different conversations. When we know what we want to do, magical things will happen. And a lot of it can be explained through science or psychology, and some of it we just can't explain. But the one thing that I know for sure is when we write things, if you did nothing else, if you got nothing from today, and you wrote a dream sheet, my dad does a dream sheet, it's amazing to watch him, and you look at that dream sheet every day for a month, 6 months from now, your life will be completely different than it is right now. Because it'll start you down a path. And I remember my dad, he came out to Alberta last year, and we drove over the Rockies to Vancouver and took a cruise ship up to Alaska, and Dad got to walk on the glacier and put his feet in the Pacific Ocean. And he goes home, and he's very, very into Facebook, and he writes down, he said, I've accomplished everything on my dream sheet, or he calls it a bucket list. I've accomplished everything on my, it makes me nervous when I hear that. He said, I have one more thing to do. Next line he writes down, write another bucket list. So you always want to be, it doesn't matter where you are in your life, you always want to, for me it's a tool, I use it. It's on my phone, it's on my iPad, it's on my computer. If I'm in Starbucks at a lineup, I'll bring my thing up, I'll look at what I'm focusing my attention on at any given time. I'm always looking at my dream sheet. So that's step number one. And it kind of is like this for the men that are in the audience. This is just not, help. For the men that you're going to go home tonight, you're going to watch your favorite television show, Glee. But you don't want your friends to know you're watching Glee. So what you're going to do is you're going to put a picture-in-picture up in the right-hand corner of something that's like a sporting good event, a game or something like that, so that you can talk intelligently to your friends the next day. But if you make that compelling enough, you're going to hit that button and make that the big picture. And that's what writing something in your dream sheet is. You take your reality today, which is, you, your family, all the things that are going on. You put a picture in picture. If you make it compelling enough, you'll make that the big picture. Now, chance of you skipping along a beach like that if your kids are going to stay with you until they're 33 is probably not really that, good, but maybe that's your summer vacation instead. So it just changes our focus. It gives us something to focus our attention on. The next step is to believe we can do it. And belief is really the fuel to allow us to succeed. Now, the interesting thing with belief, whatever you tell yourself is true, it believes it. So we have learned to believe things that might not even be true. And I always think of an example. My dad was telling me a story. When he was younger, he used to hunt. So he would hunt with the local eye doctor from his community. Norman McCaskill was the eye doctor, and Norman McCaskill had poor vision. It's kind of ironic the eye doctor had poor vision, but so only Dad would carry a rifle because you don't want to give Norman the rifle because he doesn't have good vision. So Dad has the rifle, Dad's walking down through the woods, Norman's walking beside him, there's a rustling of the trees, Norman looks over, this big black thing starts charging toward him. He goes, bear! My father takes that rifle, throws it in the air, and starts to run as fast as he possibly can. Dad's a big man, too. Dad was, probably 240 or 250 pounds at the time, not in really good shape. He said, it's amazing when the adrenaline cuts in at how you can run. He said, I am running in. He said, it's amazing what you think. He said, one of the first things I think is just outrun Norman. He said, as long as Norman's between me and the bear, I'm in pretty good shape. So he said, I'm going. He said, I don't know how far I went. He said, but he would have experienced the fight or flight thing. The blood would have left his extremities, would have went to protect the organs. The body would have stopped digesting food at that moment. Like all of those things would have happened. He stops and he says, I got to go back and see how Norman's doing. So he works his way back through the woods and he can hear Norman making noises. And he goes and sneaks up behind a tree and looks around the tree. And Norman's on the ground rolling around playing with his dog. Because the moment Norman's dog ran through the trees, Norman, with poor vision, saw it as a bear, hollered the word bear, Dad believed him. And that's what happens is we often hold beliefs that are not true. We just, somehow through our life, we brought those beliefs into our life. So the first thing we have to do is believe that we can do it. So identify our goals, believe we can do it. And the last thing is we have to become what's called receptive to receiving our goals. And what receptive means is that you're going to become the person you would need to be as if you already had the goal in your life. Because in any area of your life where you're successful now, it's because you are living exactly the way you would need to be successful. If you look at any area of your life, if you're successful at work, it's because you're doing all the right things. If you're successful in a relationship, it's because you're doing all the right things. So I have to tell you the one that I struggled with. I mean, work for me has always been easy. I've always been able to hit numbers when people ask me to, or I was good at managing people. I struggled with my weight, and I still do. So what I did was I wrote a list I looked at all the areas of my life that I was succeeding, and you could write a list of why I was succeeding. I was a good dad, I was good at work. So I wrote a list of all of the things that I needed to do to maintain my weight of 225 pounds. What was I eating? What was my exercise routine? How did I feel? What kind of clothes did I wear? And then I wrote a list next to it of all of the things I would do if I weighed 190 pounds. That was my goal at the time, was 190 pounds. So I wrote all of what would I eat, what would I wear, how would I feel, would I exercise more? And then I said, well, why don't I just do that, what's on that list? Because all the other areas of my life that I'm doing the things I want to do is because I'm doing those things on that list. I'm just not doing what I would need to be 190 pounds. So I started doing those things. I put the Fitbit on. I started walking 10,000 steps a day. I started watching what I was eating. I didn't eat as many potato chips and things like that. And I went down to 190 and then 180 and then 175. So for me, it was becoming that person I needed to be. It's almost like when the moment you discover you're pregnant, not for the men in the audience, but the moment that you discover you would have in your lifetime 10 times that they discovered they were having children. At the moment you discover you're having a child, nothing has changed. You're exactly the same as you were a moment before you discovered, but everything changes. At that moment, everything changes. Now, in your case, no, not so much. You're like, we already have the clothes, we have everything we need, there's just another one coming along. But for most of us, when we discover that we're pregnant, what we do is we run out and we buy a book called What to Expect When You're Expecting. We sit down with our friends, we try and come up with baby names. We have baby showers. We build a section of the house to put a child in. But there's no child at that point, but we're doing all that stuff to get ready. It should be the same way when it comes to goal setting. We should become receptive as if the goals are coming. You become a parent before the child even comes into your life. You want to do the same thing with your goals. You want to become that person before the goals even come into your life. So there's kind of 5 things that you want to think about when in becoming receptive. One is it's more than just positive thinking. I'm a big attribute of positive thinking. And I got to tell you, I am a very positive person. But I have bad days. Maybe bad hours. I used to have bad weeks or maybe a bad month. I don't let myself go there anymore because I know there is no benefit in being down. So I might have something bad might happen. I wear this little bracelet because my very best friend passed away a month ago, and we all wear them to remember Andy by. So that was a bad day. But that day I even think about all the things to be grateful for, the love that we have around us. So I don't let myself have bad days because I know they're hurting me. But I could have wallowed in my sorrow for a month at a time when I was younger, but it does us no purpose to be there from any reason, science, psychology, or divinity reason. So it's more than just a positive attitude. The second thing is, don't focus on the fact that what you want to have happen in your life isn't here yet. Because we don't do that with children. We don't say, well, they're not here yet, they must not be coming. Like, we know they're coming. There's a timeline, usually around 9 months. We know they're going to show up. It's the same thing with our goals. Like, don't focus on the fact that if you're trying to find that perfect person in your life, don't focus on the fact that they're not there, because we tend to bring more things into our life that we focus our attention on. So by focusing on it not being there, we're actually bringing not being there into our life. So we always want to be focusing on the goal. Stay focused on the outcome. The next thing, become detached on how it's delivered. Now, get my cell phone out. Before I spoke at the $1 Million Roundtable, I spoke at another conference called A Taste of the $1 Million Roundtable. So it's for young insurance reps that hopefully someday will get to the $1 Million Roundtable. And after I spoke, there's a group of people came around the front of the stage, and this one gentleman who was the president of the $1 Million Roundtable was kind of hovering behind them. And he came up to me afterwards, and he said, Eddie, I got to tell you, he said, I don't always get what you guys talk about, but he said, I got to tell you, something weird just happened to me, and he said, I just want to tell you about it. So he said, anyway, he said, after you spoke, he said, I went out in the hallway, and a friend wanted to use my phone. So he said, I went to hand him the phone, and I noticed the battery was almost dead. He said, which I thought was really odd because I had just charged it that morning and I hadn't used it, and I thought it was odd that maybe the charger wasn't working. He said, but anyway, he said, I handed the phone to my friend, and My friend makes his call, and as he's handing it back to me, the phone is ringing, and it's my wife. And he said, I got to tell you a little story here. He said, Eddie, he said, my wife really wanted to come to this conference to hear you speak. She said, not because she knew who you were, but because you were talking on this topic, bring about what you think about, and it's something she was really interested in. And he said, our son got very ill, and we didn't think it was prudent for the two of us to travel, so she decided to stay at home, and I came without her. He said, so let me get back to the story. He said, as the phone is handed back to me, it's ringing, it's my wife. I pick the phone up, and I go, look, dear, you're going to have to be really fast because I noticed the battery's almost dead. And she said, Roger, do you want to know why the battery's almost dead? And he said, what are you talking about? She said, Roger, about 45 minutes ago, she said, I finally got our young fellow to fall asleep. She said he was uncomfortable and all morning couldn't get him to fall asleep. She said, I finally got him to fall asleep. She said, I was just sliding off the bed. The phone rings. It's you calling me. So she said, I put the phone up to my ear to say, Roger, just give me a second. I get out of the bedroom here. And she said, I couldn't hear you, but I could hear them introducing that Lemoyne guy. He's going to talk on his book. Bring about what you think about. She said, Roger, I sat on the edge of the bed and I listened to every word he said like I was sitting in the room with you. So that's when something's delivered to you in a way that you didn't see it happen. So there's two forms of detachment. Become detached to how something's going to happen in your life. Be open to the possibilities. The other form of detachment is you cannot move on in any area of your life until you're detached from what's holding you in the current area. Can't move to your next job if you don't let go of the one you're in. If you want to be promoted, you have to let someone else into that position to allow you to be promoted. I couldn't be 200 or 175 pounds and attached to the lifestyle at 225 pounds. I can't go to a better relationship if I'm stuck in one that I'm not happy with. So we always have to become detached from what's holding us back and become detached from how things will happen in our life. The next thing is watch your limiting beliefs. You know, I know some of you might sit there and say, Eddie, that might work for you, it won't work for me. Or you'll sit there and you'll say, well, you know, that might work in another part of the country, it won't work here, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not well educated. Watch your limiting beliefs, because the problem with our limiting beliefs is that they're invisible. It's like a prison and you can't see the bars. And the problem is it's just as bad as being in prison, because those limiting beliefs hold us back. So I'm always trying to be aware of when I say to myself, I don't think I can do it, or maybe I always say, Eddie, what's the limiting belief here? What's holding you back? The next thing, isn't this weird? There's two things to do to exhilarate this happening in your life. The first thing is to give more. And you want to give in the areas of your life you lack the most. And that's what's really difficult about the whole giving thing. If you notice the areas of your life where you're really successful, it's because you're giving a lot in those areas. If you have a very successful relationship, you're probably giving it 100%. If you're really successful at work, you're probably giving it 100%. If you're struggling in your health, it's probably because you're not doing 100% in that area that you need to do to be successful in that area. So let me give you some examples. A lot of people struggle on the financial side. I mean, that's one of the harder areas. So we'll use that as an example. You might say, well, Eddie, it's hard for me to give when I don't have something to give. So the interesting thing when it comes to finances, you can give your time, you can volunteer, there's ways you can give. But my wife and I, we're big walkers. And even more so now than even yesterday, we did 15,000 steps yesterday. Now, I got to tell you, you know, being this kind of generational expert, the one thing my wife and I do, and only the baby boomers in the room will understand this, everything we do in our life right now, we plan bathroom breaks. I don't know, you know, it's just the way it works now. Like, so if we're traveling, we always look for the bathrooms. We got in here, I said, where are the bathrooms at? When we walk, we do bathroom breaks. So we do kind of two walks. We do a 5-kilometer walk. There's a coffee shop in the middle of the 5-kilometer walk where we live. And then we would do a downtown walk where there are multiple bathrooms, and we would do a 10-kilometer walk in the downtown core. But the downtown core, there's a lot of kids that are panhandling on the streets. So when we first started going down there, I used to say to my wife, I said, well, why wouldn't these kids just go get a job? Like, they seem to be healthy, young. But I learned after a while that a lot of these kids that are on the street, it is the safest place for them to be. They come from such horrific homes and backgrounds that they're safer on the street than from where they came. So over time, my wife and I have done endless different charity events for young at-risk kids. But at the very beginning, it started with something simple. We would carry money in our pockets. And every time we would walk by somebody on the street, we'd give them money. After a while, they all got to know us, and even when they were kind of off-duty panhandling, they would come up and they would stand at attention when we would walk by. But there's always a couple that stand out. And one night, we came out of a restaurant, and we had paid by credit card. I didn't have any cash in my pocket. There was a lady on the street. I put her almost my mother's age, probably in her mid-70s, and it was a cold night. She had a pair of little low shoes on. She was very white and pasty, and she said, "Excuse me, sir." She said, "Do you have any spare change?" And I looked at her and I said, "I am so sorry, but I actually paid by credit card and I don't have any cash." "No worries, sir." She said, "You have yourself a wonderful night." So we're walking down the road and I looked at my wife and said, "Tanya, I got to go. I got to go to the bank machine. I'm going to get some money. Let's go buy a package of gum and we'll go back and we'll give her some money." So anyway, we go back and I gave her, I think, $4. And she looked at me and she said, "God bless you, sir." She said, "I must have been here." She said, "For 3 hours, you're the first person who's given me any money." Now, maybe she says that to everyone. So I looked at her and I said, "Oh, you have yourself a wonderful night, dear." And she said, "Look," she said, "what's your name?" I said, "My name's Eddie Lemoyne." She said, "Eddie Lemoyne." She said, "I'm going to say a little prayer for you. It's all I can afford." And I said, "That'll be just perfect." So off down the road I go. Now I have $15 in my pocket. So I said to Tanya, I said, "Let's go to Second Cup." "Do you have Second Cup? Do you have Second Cup?" He said, "Let's go to Second Cup. It's a little coffee shop. It's like a Starbucks wannabe." And he said, "We'll order our tea and coffee." So Tanya sits in the window, beautiful seat, and I go down to order a tea and a coffee. And the lady who works in the coffee shop comes over with a big peanut butter cookie, and she looks at me. She said, "Would you like this peanut butter cookie?" And now here's the thing with giving. If you want to give, you also have to be able to receive. So when someone offers you something, you have to be able to take it, or you're not letting them to give, right? So I didn't really need the peanut butter cookie, but I said, "Sure, I'll take the peanut butter cookie. Why are you giving me a peanut butter cookie?" She said, "Sir, it's broke." And she said, "We're not allowed to sell them when they break." She said, "So we just wait for someone that comes in that seems like a nice person. You seem like a nice person, and we'd like for you to have that cookie." So I remember going up and I sat down with my wife and I said, "Look at that, dear." I said, "We just gave that woman up the street $4 and the universe just gave us back a $7 peanut butter cookie. See how fast that really works?" So now every once in a while, I don't know, some of you that are a little bit older in the room would have experienced this, but my wife and I, we downsized a couple of years ago. Kids moved out, and we sold a house. It was a big house, and we had a whole floor of furniture that there was nowhere for it to go anymore. There was no cottages left. There was no, kids are already all outfitted. And so we got down to this beautiful sectional coach. And I said, "There's got to be a place for this to go." So sure enough, there's a spot where you could bring it, and they would clean it all up and give it to someone who needed it. So I'm thinking, this is a teaching moment for my son. So I put the coach in the back of the back of the van, and off we go down, and we give them the coach. And as we're leaving, I looked at my son, and I thought, this is that moment where I can teach him something. I said, "Jason, that was your Aunt Shirley's coach." I said, "Aunt Shirley and Uncle Jerome used to sit on that coach and have tea." And I said, "Your Uncle Billy had the coach for a little while before I got it, and we used to sit on that and drink rum and coke and play the guitar." And I said, "Jay, when you were a baby, I held you in my arms in that coach." He looked at me, he goes, "Yeah, Dad, just think, tomorrow night somebody's going to be smoking crack on that coach." So he didn't quite get the whole giving thing, but he's much better now, but at the time. So they accelerate, to make yourself go farther up on that scale, give, and give in areas that you lack. And then the last thing is to live in an attitude of gratitude. And next to love, gratitude is the most powerful emotion we have as a human being. And the interesting thing with gratitude is wherever we focus our attention, so we focus our attention on gratitude, we tend to bring more things into our life to be grateful for. Now, I have a couple things that I do to help. One is I carry a few things in my pocket, which I don't have now because I always empty my pockets before I stand in front of an audience and give it to my wife. But I also carry this particular pen. So this pen was given to me by my staff probably about 20 years ago. Of all the thousands of books that I've sold, I've signed almost every one with this pen. Every contract I've done, every mortgage we've had, every car I've bought, I've signed with this pen. But more importantly, every time I touch it, I think of something to be grateful for. It has been with me for the last 20 years, and you could all do something simple. You can put a little rock in your pocket. You can have something that will bring you. But I travel a lot, so when I lay this on the bureau, in a hotel, I always think of my children, my wife, my friends. I always think of things to be grateful for, because wherever we focus our attention, we tend to be more grateful. So I want to wrap up with a story on why I do this, and then I'm going to I'll let you know a couple things that we have available for you if you're interested. I really want to make a difference in people's lives. I really do. I don't, when I walk in a room, I want to make a difference. And it's what I do for a living is an interesting way to make a life. I travel. I don't like traveling. I don't like airplanes. I don't like lineups. I don't like security. I don't like any of that. But standing in front of you makes all of that easier for me. But I got to tell you, a few years ago, or many years ago initially, my wife and I decided we wanted to have children. And I got to tell you, up until that point, I never really cared for kids. I never saw the attraction that other people saw with children. I mean, when you think about it, they're bald and they burp and fart and they have no teeth. Like, they're not even attractive. But for some reason, when we hit our early 20s, children looked adorable. You just get to that place where they just look adorable. And Tanya and I wanted to have kids, and we couldn't. We tried and we couldn't. And I remember one day I said to Tanya, I said, you know what? If this is meant to be, it's going to happen. I think we're just concentrating too much on it. So sure enough, I bet you a month later, Tanya was pregnant. So we're living in the west coast of Canada at the time, but our home is on the east coast. So we go home for Christmas, and my wife fell down a flight of stairs and lost a baby in a miscarriage. Now, I got to tell you, miscarriages is one of those things that you have no idea how many people it touches until it happens in your life and you have these conversations, right? And my mother had a miscarriage. It wasn't me, mind you, but she did have a miscarriage. And I never would have known that had it not happened in our own life. So after Christmas, we go back to Alberta, and a couple months later, Tanya's pregnant again. And we went through all that stuff, what to expect when you're expecting, all of those things. And after, we flew both mothers out to witness the birth of our child, and in the middle of the night, Tanya starts huffing and puffing. She goes, it's time. I go, it's like 3 o'clock. She goes, no, it's time to go. We have to go. So I remember I brought her to the Red Deer Hospital in central Alberta, and 36 hours of labor. She goes into duress, and they have to do an emergency C-section, and they wouldn't let me in the room. And I remember saying to my wife, or the two mothers at the time, I said, boy, our baby's going to be a screamer. We grew up playing the guitars and singing and everything. So I see this nurse carrying a baby. It's not making a sound. I said, it's not mine. I'll just wait for a noisy one. And I said, I better go check. So I walk into a room, unbeknown to me, the intensive care unit. She said, are you Mr. Lemoyne? I said, yes, I am. She said, congratulations. She said, you have a little baby girl. She said, we need about 20 minutes to run some tests. Would you mind coming back in about 20 minutes? I said, no, not at all. So I took the two mums upstairs, and we got balloons and banners that said it's a girl. We bought fish and chips. I remember the meal. Came back down. I said to the two mums, I said, you sit right here. I'm going to go in and make sure everything's okay. I walk in, and a doctor walks up. She's a little tiny woman. Dr. Friarello, still practices medicine today. And she looked at me. She said, are you Mr. Lemoyne? I said, yes, I am. And she said, I have bad news. She said, your baby was born with massive pneumonia, streptococcal B, has less than a 5% chance of survival. Now, I had to go tell my wife what was going on. So I walked in the room where Tanya was, and I had never cried a tear in my life. I grew up as tough as nails growing up, never cried a tear in my life. The minute I looked at her, I lost it. Now, I got to tell you, for the men in the audience, once you cry once, you are a basket case for the rest of your life. Like, Extreme Home Makeover, they moved that bus. I'd cry that much, I couldn't even see the television. McDonald's commercials, Hallmark cards. I bought my daughter a Hallmark card. I cried that much. I have no idea how it ended. We watched a marathon on the Women's Network of all the Christmas shows. Right coming on the end, the snowflakes would fly, and the kiss would happen, and I'd start crying. But after about 3 days, the doctor came to me. She said, Eddie, put the birth announcement in the paper. Everything's going to be okay. And I remember looking at her saying, Dr. Friarello, I said, what did you do? And she said, Eddie, she said, your child is a miracle. But she said, I got to tell you, she said, I was at a conference, and it was a CMA conference, and she said,